Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order this session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Will the clerk please call the vote? Roll, sorry. Not voting yet.
Councilmember Kovar.
Here.
Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Duvalla.
Present.
Councilmember Costick.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Searcy.
Here.
Good evening, everyone. We have one change to the agenda that I think was made online. We, given the number of staff that we have with us this evening to talk about the FY23 budget amendment number 1, we're going to move that up to our first work session this evening. But other than that, our agenda tonight stays the same. I will do our proclamation for this evening and then talk about our upcoming meetings. Tonight we have a proclamation for Bebe Moore Campbell National Minority Mental Health Month Awareness. Whereas Bebe Moore Campbell was an accomplished African-American author and journalist, advocate, and co-founder of the National Alliance of Mental Health, NAMI, Urban Los Angeles, and national spokesperson for mental health education and support among individuals with mental illness and their families. And whereas she was recognized for her tireless advocacy and for bringing awareness and attention to mental illness among minorities with the release of her New York Times bestselling novel, 72-Hour Hold, and her children's book, Sometimes My Mommy Gets Angry. And whereas in 2008, the U.S. House of Representatives designated July as Bebe Moore Campbell National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month in her honor to enhance public awareness of mental health illness, especially within minority communities. And whereas mental illness affects 14% of Asian adults, 17% of Black adults, 18% of Hispanic Latinx adults, 32% of multiracial adults, 44% of LGBT adults. And whereas trans adults are nearly 12 times more likely to attempt suicide than the general population. And whereas mental health conditions do not discriminate based on race, color, or gender, however, a person's culture and identity can make access to mental health treatment much more difficult. And whereas according to the Office of the Minority and National Affairs for the American Psychiatric Association, approximately 2/3 of all people with a diagnosable mental illness do not seek treatment due to stigma, lack of community-based resources, inadequate diagnosis, or no diagnosis. And whereas the month of July is a time to amplify NAMI's message, Together for Mental Health, and to use this time to bring our voices together to advocate for mental health and access to care. Therefore, I, Kate Stewart, Mayor of the City of Tacoma Park, Maryland, on behalf of the City Council, residents, and staff, proclaim July 2022 as Bebe Moore Campbell National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month and recognize her dedication and commitment to influence communities to support mental wellness through effective treatment options, open access to mental health treatment and services, and improve community outreach and support for our family and community members. Thank you. Looking ahead at our agenda, next week, July 20th, we will begin our meeting at 6:30. Everybody hear that? Verbal acknowledgement. 6:30 is our meeting time. We will start with a presentation of the minor master plan update. We'll have a proclamation for July as Park and Recreation Month. And we have a lot of voting items next week. We have a single reading ordinance awarding a contract for library construction, single reading ordinance awarding a contract for inspection and testing services for the library redevelopment project, single reading ordinance awarding a contract for construction management services for the community center renovation, single reading ordinance awarding a contract for a stormwater resiliency study, first reading ordinance approving FY23 stormwater budget amendment number 1, first reading ordinance approving FY23 budget amendment number 1, first reading ordinance amending the Tacoma Park election code, a resolution providing for appointments and reappointments to boards and committees. Lots of voting items next week. Our work session next week is on procurement on the tree canopy pilot contract, ARPA procurement contract for direct cash assistance program, and rental inspection contract with Montgomery County. Then on Wednesday, July 27th, we're back at our regular time at 7:30. And the voting session will be the second reading ordinance of all the things I talked about before, plus single reading ordinance approving a contract for ARPA Direct Cash Assistance Program, single reading ordinance approving a contract for the Tree Canopy Pilot Program, and a single reading ordinance authorizing execution of a contract with Montgomery County for rental inspections, and a resolution providing for the City Council's summer recess. we think we can get that all done by the end of the evening on July 27th. But if necessary, we do have tentatively scheduled a meeting for Wednesday, August 3rd. And that will take us now to public comments. We have no voting items this evening, so we'll begin with public comments in the auditorium. If you have public comments, please come to the podium. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Tababu from 7720 Carroll Avenue. I'm here to see you. It's good to see you in person, but most important, I have a very high-profile guest from Ethiopia. He's a president of Social Enterprise, my partnering organization. Year 21 and 22, I went to Ethiopia twice for 3 months, and they're on the ground. They have similar aspiration like Benefit Corporation. We've partnered with them. And so he's visiting me. I want him to see the people of Tacoma. I want him to see Tacoma Park. And he's here with us. So, in fact, let me quickly give him a minute to say hi to you. And great to see you. And there's a lot of exciting things as far as my project is concerned. Even though it's a difficult time, there's hope at last. Cabra?
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Kibrat Abebe. I'm the founder of the first social enterprise ambulance service system in Ethiopia, and I'm the current president of Social Enterprise Ethiopia. I'm so happy to be here. We have been talking about this for the last, I can say, 2 years. We are trying to mitigate social problems with business model in Ethiopia, and we want to promote this for the entire Africa because we are saying that aid is not the only solution for Africa as well. So we want to have business problem being solved with business model. We are promoting sustainable solution. The problem with solving social problem like me. I'm an anesthesia person by profession. I was working in big teaching and referral hospital in Addis Ababa. Ethiopia is in the top in the global list of road traffic injury, and I said that we can save life. So people were very much skeptical about my idea. Then in 2008, I started the first ambulance service system in Ethiopia by selling my only house. So I want to solve this problem with a business model. We said that we can impact and we can make profit. So before 2 years back, I came to United States to speak in State Department, and I met with this wonderful person called Tababu. So he's just promoting the same issues. So I heard him talking about Benefit Corporation, and I approached him and I said that this is very important for us, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So I invited him into Addis Ababa. He came to Addis, and we passed through so many very exciting and very challenging time in Ethiopia to let them understand what we are talking about, because in Ethiopia, either you make non-profit or profit maximization. There is no middle ground like making impact and making profit as well. So we started talking to the president of Ethiopia, Her Excellency Sahle-Work Zawde. We start from that, and the government is very, very much interested on the topic. The entire struggle that we are making is to make Ethiopia champion, to be the first to take this Benefit Corporation legislation to Ethiopia, make it Ethiopianized, make it workable legislation in Ethiopia. So I'm very much excited, very happy to be here. In 2019, we conduct the first World Forum in Addis Ababa from 67 countries, 1,600 guests were coming to Addis Ababa, and we were very much excited. And the entire struggle is to make Ethiopia a champion concerning social enterprise. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you very much. Any other public comments in the? Yeah.
Good.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify before the council on the proposed renovation and rebuild of the Tacoma Park Library. My name is Sonia Malinoff. I'm on the board of the Friends of the Library. As newsletter editor for the Friends, I've written about and followed this process for years. I moved to Tacoma Park in 1980 and raised 3 children, all attending local schools. The library was central to their education and learning, especially my daughter, who every year treated the summer quest as her personal quest. At 40 with her own children, she still follows our program for a young daughter. The library is centrally located in Tacoma Park and ideally located between 3 schools. Serving a diverse community, it is a way station between the schools, a place to get away and sit and read, a place to see speakers and engage in community activities, a place for our immigrant community to gain access to information on jobs and community. Someone in the library is always there to help and answer questions. During the pandemic, our library remained essential while not physically open, delivering books, having outdoor activities, and importantly, providing access to internet for citizens who would sit outside on the tables provided with funding from the Friends. A neighbor told me a story about a hard-to-get knitting book, a senior citizen. She reached out to one of the Tacoma Park librarians during the pandemic. Within days, they found it and had it transferred here from some out west library. I'm not sure we get the same attention elsewhere. Our library is aged and needs updating. It is not ADA compliant. I understand there are leaks and the air filtration cannot be updated. I believe our 60-plus-year-old library will become obsolete within the next decade. The rebuild would provide more space for children and young adults, for special meetings, along with modernizing IT for media. It does not lose any space for real books in the new design, and it doesn't look at all like the Silver Spring Library, contrary to some opinion. There are long memories, most not fond, in our community of the community center construction. I was here during that time, and many do not trust the city to manage another large build project because of that experience. I believe the city learned from that, and this time is different. A dedicated project manager has been hired, and other safeguards built into the process to ensure we'll get the library we planned for. I love Tacoma Park. It is a small town amid this much larger DMV, and our library is at the heart of that small town feel. We need our library. My children are grown, but where will the next generation congregate? We should not miss this chance to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Mr. Kelly?
Good evening. My name is Bern Kelly. I live in Ward 3. I own 2 properties in the city of Tacoma Park. My house and my wife's house. We got remarried. Nice to see you all again. First off, I want to say that I support the library, but not where it's proposed, and not at the expense of $4 million of ARPA money. There are people who need rent and food and internet in this town, and taking ARPA money for a new library, which could have been built on this wing of this building and not in a floodplain, it is not a smart choice, it is not a smart design, and we could have done much better if you had hired a consulting architect that advocates for the city, but that was not the case. I propose you can that project and push the reset button. It's way over budget. The $9 million budget is not realistic. It will be cost overruns just like it was for this building. Secondly, stormwater management project in Cockrell Avenue in Spring Park. No notification to any of the residents this project was coming, no line item in the budgets. DPW is working in the dark. There is no light, Mr. Fox. There is no transparency in what they are doing. I'm trained in stormwater management. I'm a licensed landscape architect. I went to the Dewberry Institute for Stormwater Management. I work with civil engineers and surveyors. This project, as told to me by Ian Chamberlain, the project manager, said there will be no extra water that will come out on my property and the 9 other properties below the outfall. There's no attenuation pond. They're taking a 12-inch pipe, enlarging it to a 28-inch pipe, and adding 3 or 4 more inlets. And he says there will be no change. There will be higher volume and a greater intensity. And the 9 properties below the outfall with no attenuation pond are threatened. And I want to see the records, I want to see what the engineering is, and I want a peer review of the engineering. Because we're going to have a class action suit on our hands if we don't get a way to stop that water from already flooded properties. I'm sick and tired. I spent $9,000 on the last flood. Okay? These people's livelihoods and their homes are endangered by the project that's going on now that none of us knew was coming. It is not acceptable. And thirdly, this council is holding on to a 99-year lease with NDC, and they're going to kick the can down the road because you're running for other offices, most of you. Thank goodness some of you are staying and one of you is running for mayor, and I appreciate that. But this is an abomination. 7-0 vote against that corporation, which we all know the history of. And the money and the cost of that is unconscionable, and you need to break the lease before you leave this office. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Any other public comments this evening? Seeing no public comments in the auditorium, I believe we have one public comment online. We'll go there. And it's Mr. Hubner, is that correct? I don't know if none of our screens are working.
Good evening. Finally, Jesse usually has this queued up by now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Hubner. Go
great.
ahead.
I'll start now. Thank you. Paul Hubner, Ward 3. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm here to represent myself and nearby residents on Boyd and Carroll Avenues to get a long overdue repair to our public alley. There are some 14 or 15 vehicles and multiple service trucks that use our alley on a daily basis. For those of us who live on Carroll Avenue, this alley is our primary place to park and gain rear access to our homes. Over 2 years ago, as the city installed new sidewalks on Carroll Avenue, north of the co-op, we began requesting that the city rectify a problem that they created. That they created before, which has continued to deteriorate and damage our vehicles. This alley serves 5 homes on Carroll, 3 single-family homes on Boyd Avenue, and a multifamily building on Manor Circle. With sidewalk installation crews merely 60 feet away, I managed to garner a meeting with the city construction manager and both city contracted engineering firm representatives. At 2 independent meetings, all of the professionals in attendance acknowledged the deficiencies and that the alley apron would meet none of the city or state parameters for slope, as identified in all engineering drawings that the city uses to build or reconstruct city sidewalks, driveways, or aprons adjoining city or state streets. In response to the ongoing inquiries of our group and our city council member, Casey Kostick, the director of public works said that she was aware of the problem, but they had no work order and we were not on the list, end quote. At Casey's suggestion, we immediately wrote, signed, and sent a petition to Casey. The city finally got a bona fide estimate from an engineering firm this past February. Since there is no defined course of action to correct deficient city work or denied request, and since it seems we are left to the whim and mercy of the city staff, we need your help. Just last week, repairs to our alley were again denied. We are again requesting the aid and support of the mayor and our council members, as well as the city manager, to answer, where is our alley on this mythical list? When will the work be done? And what is supposed to be the process for residents to get such repairs? And who will declare support for our rightful cause? Additionally, I will here assert that I have dozens of emails and communications over the last 2 years to support our entreaties, and I feel confident that our situation is not the only one that is overtly cast aside and dismissed by a decision of the staff, with no defined redress other than coming to our city council. Finally, I ask you all, what should we do to create a more responsive government and get answers to our requests, as well as a defined, systematic approach for resident needs and requests? Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hubner. I believe those are all the public comments for this evening. I'll turn now to council comments. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. I appreciate the comments this evening from residents. I would ask staff if you could look into the inquiries made by Mr. Kelly and Mr. Hubner and get back to council on the issues that they have. I would like to give a special thanks to Babu and his guests. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing to make Africa sustainable. I am a huge advocate of One Africa and Africa being able to advocate for itself and be financially the breadbasket, the leader in this world. So I appreciate you guys coming out tonight. If there's anything I can do to support your endeavor, don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman DeBala.
Yes, thank you. So all of what he said, pretty much. So I had been planning also to ask if you could, City Manager Fox, follow up on a couple of the items that were raised. And I have already welcomed, and I welcome officially our guest from Ethiopia, and I'm pleased to have met you. I did have a couple of other things. I wanted to say that last night's meeting for Long Branch Sligo neighborhood with Captain Sipperly and Lieutenant Williams went very well. Thank you to both of them, and thank you to the Community Association for setting it up. And if you missed it, it was recorded. There were over 20 people attending. So there's clearly some interest in this topic, and a couple of action items came out of it that Lieutenant Williams is working on with me and Public Works. I wanted to remind everyone that early voting is still open through tomorrow, and then Election Day, for those of you who are registered in a party, is the 19th of July. And for those who are not registered in a party, some of the contests are open to folks who are not part of a party. So school boards, for example, candidates you can vote for. So there's really no reason not to vote. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman DeBala. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. Many of you know that for almost 15 years, or maybe a little more, I have worked with my dear friend Tababu Asefa and helped and advised him through all that time with his development of his business enterprise and his great ambition to be a blessing to his home country and at the same time being a blessing to the local communities here. I would like to just take a minute and read a certificate issued by County Executive Mark Elrich. And I apologize, it's on my little tiny phone and I have my old eyes on tonight. The County Executive of Montgomery County, Maryland, awards this certificate to Kebret Abebe, President of the Social Enterprise Ethiopia, in recognition and appreciation of your partnering with the Benefit Corporation for Africa initiative, which was inspired by the Benefit Corporation legislation sponsored by the then State Senator Jamie Raskin in 2010 and adopted by the state in 2010. Today, 38 states have adopted similar legislation, and this important model is now being taken to Africa, and we thank you for your work on that. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Searcy.
Good evening, everyone. First, I want to thank all of our commenters tonight. To Babu and your guest, I'm so appreciative of not only your passion, but your commitment to bringing the city of Takoma Park along as your partner. I am so excited by what you all are describing and what you're trying to do in Ethiopia. And if there's anything that I can do in my capacity, please, please, please let me know. I am more than happy to help. I also want to thank those that came out and made comments tonight about the library. I appreciate all of the feedback that we've received, the positive as well as the potential negative aspects of the project. It's something that's critically important to ensure that we are moving in the right direction. This project has been in the making for a decade, and so definitely is going to take all of us together to move the project forward. Want to remind folks in the New Hampshire Gardens community that there is a community association meeting that is happening tomorrow via Zoom at 7 p.m. And we will be discussing the minor master plan, answering questions people have about that, as well as traffic calming requests that have come through. So I want to encourage people to participate. I want to remind everyone the Crossroads Farmers Market is still going, and it's awesome, and it's wonderful food and great veggies to pick up, lots of small local vendors. So I want to encourage people to come out on Wednesdays to Ann Street and partake of the farmers market. Lastly, the Larch Kentland Hopewell neighborhood. Want to thank Public Works. I know Ian has been working a lot in addressing comments and questions that folks have had regarding the sidewalk and traffic calming design. We're asking everyone to provide your comments by the end of day on Monday, the 18th. What we're hoping to do is take your feedback on the design and any questions that you have back to our engineers so that we will be able to make adjustments as needed, and then be able to move forward with presenting an updated design along with a voting opportunity for you all. So again, I want to encourage people, say something. If you have any issues with the sidewalk design that we met about, please send us an email and let us know by Monday. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Costick.
Good evening, everyone. And I want to echo my colleagues' thanks to our public commenters tonight. I really appreciate the comments on the library that we've received tonight, as well as through email. Very helpful in terms of thinking through the project, as well as the comments related to some of the Public Works projects. I've already followed up with Public Works regarding the Boyd Alley questions, and we'll have some further information on that, as well as look forward to hearing some more on the other issues raised as well. And then again, thank you to Babu and our special guest tonight for joining us. As others have said, we're really lucky to have you in the community and doing the work that you're doing, and just really excited about the models that you're moving forward with. So thank you for joining us and telling us a little more about it tonight.
Councilmember Kolar.
Thank you. I appreciate it. First, I do want to join with my colleagues in expressing my appreciation for Tababu Asefa stepping forward and giving us an update on the project, and also for introducing his colleague from the Social Enterprise Ethiopia organization. This is one of those rare times when, even though we're a local government, there's a merging with international activity, and we're thinking locally and acting globally, or the reverse. I'm not sure, maybe both apply, but I've had an opportunity to discuss aspects of this over the years with Tababu, and I appreciate his coming forward tonight to let us know where things stand, and look forward to continuing to pursue that. And just a brief thank you to Sonia Malinoff for her comments about the library. I think she packed a lot into 3 minutes. Not easy to do, as we all know, and look forward to that discussion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll close by adding my thanks to Mr. Asefa for coming this evening, and to our guest. Is a wonderful opportunity, and we very much appreciate you taking time out of, I'm sure, what is a very busy schedule. Knowing Tababu, I'm sure he has been running you around everywhere to meet people, and I'm glad that you have that opportunity, and we hope to hear more about the great work that you are doing in Ethiopia and how we can support it here. So thank you very much for coming this evening. I want to thank Councilwoman Searcy for representing the city at the service for Reggie Chavez, who was our city council member from Ward 6, who passed away a few weeks ago. I know it meant a great deal to his family. I attended a viewing last Thursday, and having the city represented was very important to them. So thank you, Councilwoman Searcy. The other update, I was able to visit the Crossroads Food Network Community Kitchen this afternoon with our city manager, our director of housing and community development, Mr. Eubanks, and it's nice to be able to say director and not interim anymore. So I'm glad he went, and it was a wonderful opportunity to see the expansion of that the community kitchen and get an update on the work that they're doing there, and to actually see one of the people working there and using the kitchen. So I want to thank staff for coming out today and learning more about that project. And that is it for me. I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Nothing this evening.
All right, as I said, we moved around the agenda a bit, given the number of city staff who are here for our first item, and so we will kick it off with our work session on FY23 Budget Amendment number 1. I'll turn it back to the city manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Okay. All right. Mayor and members of council, the item we'll bring before you this evening is our fiscal year 23 budget amendment number 1. And I'm going to try to be very brief so we can get to questions, and we have quite a bit of staff online and in person. In this budget amendment, you will see in your materials a carryover an amount totaling a little over $2 million. Due to delays on various expenditures that we had anticipated to have completed during fiscal year 22 by the end of June 30th. Typically, at the end of the year, the money that we unused would have went back to the general fund unassigned fund balance. Staff is requesting to carry over the $2 million and designate it for the obligated projects and initiatives that we could not complete by the end of the fiscal year. This budget amendment also includes a budget increase in the general fund of right around $143,000. And you will find in your revised materials, as on the screen, as posted online as well, that there's 7 items that we're requesting an increase in, which are in the salmon color coding. Most of the items that are addressing immediate needs, and others are addressing omissions from items that we omitted during the fiscal year 22 budget development process. We have the reasons for those amendments in your materials as well as shown online. And we also have department heads here this evening to address any further questions you may have. At this time, I will turn it over to council to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. First question I have is, with the Streetery MOU, it says the carryover unused funds due to project delay was the $42,801, and then the subtraction of $45,410. Why is there a difference?
Director Eubanks?
Oh, wait. Sorry, I gotta turn you on.
Good evening, Council. There was a small difference in funding that was paid via credit card, and that reimbursement came from another account. And so there's some minor discrepancy in accounting here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eubanks. And then the cash outlay directly to residents, why is it only $500 and some thousand? I thought council had allocated more than that during our ARPA discussions? Or will more money be allocated at a different time?
Are you talking about direct cash assistance?
Yes.
Yes. More money. We created the 5-year plan, but more money will be attributed to the project.
Okay, and so those different tranches, will they happen later this year, or are you anticipate it happening next fiscal year, or what's the plan?
Yes, in this fiscal year.
This fiscal year. Okay, great. And then the $2 million for the library I guess the make up for the deficit. What is that? Do you know exactly what that directly is going to be used for, or?
Director Eubanks?
Councilmember, that is just a movement of the $4 million from, I believe, fiscal year '24 to a period earlier. We just expect to use the funds earlier than we previously did.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Great. I had a question regarding the additional $33,000 on the website, if we could get an update on that.
Yes, Ms. Wright?
Hi, thank you. After additional evaluation between IT communications and security specialist, we are requesting an additional $33,000 to provide improved cybersecurity controls, additional capacity, and resiliency for our website. Our current website was created in 2015. It was heavily customized for the city and is running on older technologies. Due to the age of the application and the heavy customization, applying security patches and updates this past year has caused a number of interruptions, requiring emergency vendor support to recover all functionality. Additionally, in 2022, a potential security breach was identified requiring emergency vendor support. The breach was quickly remediated without impacts to residents and community. These types of risks and vulnerabilities will require ongoing oversight and analysis. Additionally, due to the ongoing conflicts in Ukraine, security risk has increased exponentially, requiring more frequent security patching and systems hardening. It is the city's responsibility to provide a secure and stable website for our residents and the community. In summary, the additional funding will allow us to implement enhanced cybersecurity controls and services, additional capacity for growth, and additional resiliency to improve systems availability and recoverability, all of which will provide a stable and secure website for our residents and community. Thank you.
Thank you. So is this under the same contract that we're using for the consultant helping with the website? Or is it?
Yes.
So it's just adding to the current?
It's adding the, because of the evaluations that we've done, the ongoing security and reporting tools that we've all been putting together, we need to expand that.
Great.
To cover us through the next year.
Terrific. I would just ask before we have first reading of this, if the council could actually get a memo that outlines this in greater detail. $33,000 is actually a decent size amount of money to have in a budget amendment and increase a project that we've discussed. It sounds like there are very good reasons to do that. Thank you, Ms. Wright, for outlining them. I just ask that we are provided with some more information that you all probably have from the consultant that's doing the website, so that we could have that background information before first reading.
Yes, happy to do that. Thank you.
I will now pass it on to Councilwoman DeBala.
Yes, thank you. So I was hoping that you could perhaps explain again on the last page, the second to last page and the last page, there's a number of ARPA carryovers, and then there are ARPA increases. And I'm just run through that again about which are carryovers from the things we were thinking we would do in fiscal '22, and which are increases, which is to say transfers from somewhere else. I'm a little fuzzy on that. So that's that whole section on special revenue fund subtotal. Excuse me, ARPA fund subtotal. Second to last box for those of you who are looking on the, we're not on that page, are we?
Yeah. Most of these items here are increasing from moving funds, appropriating funds where we didn't have it established during the fiscal year 23 budget development. So there was a dollar amount that we thought that we would be able to expend. And this is moving funds sooner to be able to address these projects.
Okay, so we had outlined that we were going to use the money for certain things. And now this is actually, and now we know we're going to do it in this fiscal year.
In this fiscal year, so we
we're
added more
putting
money
it-
to be
okay.
able to complete.
Taking it out of that fund where it had been earmarked.
Yeah, because if
okay.
you remember when we did the budget and presented, you adopted
It had
a
the
5-year
years,
plan. And
yes.
so we're doing things much sooner than later.
Isn't that great?
Yes.
Thank you. I really appreciate that explanation. And I had some questions about documenting the website changes also sound important and necessary to me, that because it's a significant addition, I second the mayor's request.
Staff will work on a memo and get it to council.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask one more question about housing fund expenditure for the home stretch program. And my question is, how much will $50,000 do? Is that
So when you look at it with the home stretch is $10,000
$10,000
per,
each?
so you're looking
that
at
would be up to
5.
5 families?
Yeah, for this fiscal year, yes.
Okay. For this coming fiscal year. And that, one last question. This is again a little picky. Can someone please explain to me the recreation center appraisal? Were we planning to do that in fiscal '22? And this is a transfer? No, it says budget increase. So did we just not allocate enough for recreation center appraisal? It's one of the 7 items that is marked for an increase, and it's not a lot of money. I'm just curious about the status of the rec center appraisal process.
Yes, we started the process in FY22, but the budget is, of course, where the payment is when the product is delivered.
Right.
And so because the product wasn't delivered in FY22 and it will be delivered in '23, we have to make the transfer.
Okay, thank you.
Great, we're done. Is it possible to turn the AC up in here? I don't know if that is a request that is possible at this point, given the lateness, but it seems incredibly warm up here tonight. And I don't think it's just me. Councilwoman Costick.
Thank you. Agree on the temperature. Thank you for all the information here, and thank you to all the staff for being here today to answer our questions. I just have a couple of things. First of all, on the closed captioning, it looks like there's 186 or 185,000 that's being carried over. And I remember that just a couple weeks ago, I think it was, we voted on some closed captioning, allocating some funds for closed captioning. So I was curious if there was some that had not been expended and how that was different than what we had done before.
Yeah, Councilmember Costick, it's the same as what was presented to you recently. We have not encumbered the funds yet. We will probably encumber them, frankly, like next week or the following week. So we were just on the line and just need to carry it forward. But it is the same project that was presented to council recently.
Great, thank you. And then I had a question also about the electrification grants, the first item on here. Or I guess it's the first item in Public Works. It's a fairly substantial amount of money that's being carried over. It sounds like are those the grants and the outreach program with multifamily buildings? And are those still expected to move forward? And what is the reason for the significant delay with that?
I think Director Braithwaite is probably trying to fix the AC in
Okay.
here. So maybe we can hold the questions on
Great.
Public Works if there are other.
Yeah, my other 2 questions are about Public Works, so I can.
Okay,
I
we'll come back to you, Councilwoman Costick. Councilwoman Searcy, do you have questions other than Public Works?
Yes.
Okay.
So one question I have, and I'm just trying to make sure, because I know that we we try to proactively identify projects that would likely need to be carried over when we were a part of the budgeting process, where we were trying to proactively say, okay, these items probably aren't going to be done in time. Let's go ahead and make sure that we're moving these things forward for the next fiscal year. So what I'm trying to make sure of, because I feel like some of these items is a mix of things that we're just kind of having to move things on paper because we've done them in practice. I'm just trying to make sure that I understand, like, for example, with a lot of the items like Councilmember Costick brought up, were these things that we were already in the works with addressing? So, like, for example, we had talked about quite a few things with the budget. I know we're not supposed to talk about public works because it's hot in here, but I think that those were some of those items in particular that we knew when we were in the throes of the budgeting process that we weren't going to be able to necessarily complete them, and they were going to have to be carried over. So were some of these things accounted for when we actually dealt with the budget? I'm just trying to make sure we're not double, triple counting certain things, and this is just an exercise in making sure that what we had planned to do is what we're executing right now in terms of moving things from the prior fiscal year to the current fiscal year. Does that make sense?
The answer is yes. We did account for, particularly when you look at most of the public works, we knew because of timing and for public works to get some of the materials in or vehicles, a lot of their items, we knew that we just wouldn't, because of inflation and everything that's going on in the market, that we were going to have to move their items forward.
Okay. And then Councilmember Dabala asked about the ARPA, and I think I get it, but I wanted just to make sure, because there are some instances where we're highlighting the fact that the budget appropriation was not established in FY22, and so we're carrying things forward. And also, it looks like, for example, with the library, the budget increases to appropriate funds originally budgeted in FY24. So I'm trying to just make sure, and maybe, as part of this memo process, the ARPA is just going to be treated different because we're speccing out different pots of money that we have to kind of stretch out over this 5-year period. Things are going to have to be moved between the years. And so there's just a lot of moving parts when it comes to the ARPA dollars. And so what I think might be helpful is for the ARPA piece, if we were to actually have a little bit more language in terms of how the ARPA dollars are moving. Because in some cases, they're not moving from 22 to 23. Sometimes we're moving monies to 24, and sometimes, or unless that's a typo. But it seems like we're moving across different fiscal years to obligate dollars, and that, to me, just, it gets confusing really quickly.
And thank you, Councilmember. And yes, the ARPA is going to be a little bit different, and it's going to be impactful when we get the second tranche in a matter of weeks. But I believe that our ARPA manager, Renee Martin, is on, and we're going to try to get her, and she'll be able to speak more in detail on a lot of these projects. Just give us 1 second.
Great.
Hello, this is Renee. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Yes. In regard to the questions, one had to do with, I believe it was library, for example. If you could move the document on the that is showing to the next page. Okay. Library construction, for example, ARPA fund. Initially, City Council had authorized $4 million. Well, $4 million was on the spend plan for fiscal year 24. And it was kind of in a hold status at that point. And what's being requested here is that $2 million of that $4 million that was identified for fiscal year 24 actually be expended in fiscal year 23. And because this project can get started with that those additional funds. So that was one of the questions I remember hearing about library construction. Councilmember Cersei, was there one other area you had a specific question about?
Oh, no, that actually was that spot on. So that's just removing the hold, right?
Correct.
Okay, okay. And then the other items really are either carryovers due to unused funds in 22 that we're moving forward to 23, or in the case of the emergency rental assistance, it's we went over in 22.
If we could go back up to the previous slide. I don't want to speak out of turn here. Emergency rental assistance, correct. What was allocated for emergency rental assistance in fiscal year 22 was $250,000. The actual expenditures in fiscal year 23 went over that amount by $36,000. So for the second year, fiscal year 23, there was $250,000 also budgeted for emergency rental assistance. So as opposed to $250,000 being available in fiscal year 23, it's that amount minus this $36,000.
Okay.
So we have somewhat less funds to spend in fiscal year 23 for emergency rental assistance because that amount was spent in the previous fiscal year.
Got it. And then the Councilmember Smith asked about the direct cash assistance line item. But that line item, it looks like this 540 is in part because we're just getting our RFP out, right? So is it because that, you know, the direct cash assistance program hasn't started just yet, the reason why we're moving that 540 over?
Correct. We initially thought we were going to be able to get $540,000 out of the door in fiscal year 22. That did not happen. And so we are moving that $540,000 from the fiscal year 22 spend plan, if you will, to fiscal year 23. So in total, direct cash assistance budgeted amount was $2,300,000. So we expect to be able to expend $2,300,000 in fiscal year 23. As you see here also from the finance director, the budget appropriation was not set up in fiscal year 22. And that's not a bad thing, actually, because we're able to take those unused funds and put them in the pot for fiscal year 23.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Director Braithwaite is back. We had a couple of questions on Public Works. I'll turn it back to Councilman Costick.
Thank you for working on the air conditioning too. I just have two questions. One is regarding the grants for electrification and what the reason is for the delay, as well as whether you expect you'll be able to expend that in the upcoming year.
Yeah, those are all approvals that have already been given. So grant applications received, reviewed, approved, applicants notified, they got their project started, just like everybody else. Supply chain issues, particularly with HVAC type systems, haven't been able to get the materials in place. So those are all grant funds that were allocated in FY22 approved projects. We just have to roll it because we can't reimburse them yet because the work isn't done.
Sure. Thank you. And hopefully we'll be able to move forward on that. My other question is just about the streets and sidewalks work as well. And those are rollover funds that are going to be combined with the other funds we allocated for FY23. And you expect to be able to do all of that in this upcoming budget year. Is that right?
Yeah, we were not able to do any street work, much of any street work in FY22 because of first the hold. And then by the time we allocated funds, our contractor was not able to mobilize as they had already been obligated to other jurisdictions. So that work that was planned for 22 will be rolled into 23. And we don't see any problem spending the funds, particularly as the amount that we got is lower than in previous years.
Yeah, thank you. And then because I got a little extra time to to look at things, can you just double check, Ms. Clark, on the not right now, but before next week on the line item for closed captioning? Because I did look back at the previous item on the agenda, and it said that we had allocated 185,000, but the actual amount I think we adopted was 80. So just want to make sure that's accurate. Sure. Thank you.
Councilman Searcy, did you have a question on Public Works?
Councilmember Costick asked my question.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Then we're up to Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. And of course, after Dale Braithwaite sat down, I do have one other question. And we've also learned that it just takes you leaving for 5 minutes to solve every problem. So we're going to be expecting that going forward too. Just a quick question on the first page. One of the carryovers is the LiDAR analysis for the urban forest. And I'm just wondering if we have a timetable as to when we think that will happen. Obviously, that's important in the context of our larger work on the forest. And I don't think it's a problem that it hasn't happened yet. Just wondered what the timing looked like, if you can answer that.
Yeah, we anticipate them to be finished with their analysis in August and then putting the report together in September. So we're hoping to be able to do a public outlay of that report at a council meeting in September or October.
Okay, thank you. And that is the only thing I had to ask you. And then just one more general question, and maybe the city manager could answer this. So of the new items, you mentioned 7 are there, and most of them are pretty modest totals. I think we said 142,000 or something along those lines. Most of the rest, they're carryovers that just we didn't have time to do. And so we anticipate that the carryovers, unless something totally unexpected happens, we will get to those in this year. So So I guess my question is, we do have an ongoing concern about the size of the unassigned balance and wanting that to be bigger ultimately. Are there other proposed or allocated expenditures in the budget that may be total, individually, or add up to 140,000 or so, that we could look at maybe not doing, so that with this increase, we're still in a break-even point at this point with the first budget amendment for the year? And I'm not saying you would have that at the forefront of your mind right now, but I think it would be worth taking a look at whether there's anything else out there that we really don't need to do. And I know everything in the budget is important, but we could find ways to come up with more or less matching savings so that the net impact could be 0 instead of a positive 142,000. So maybe you can take a look at that before we vote on it next week.
Council member, appreciate your question. I won't be here next week, but
Okay.
Ms. Clark will definitely follow up on that one.
Okay. Just for people who are wondering, he was already planning not to be here, so that's not because of that.
As you remember, I'm on vacation.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And maybe we can just take a look at that.
All jokes aside, I would say that we will be looking at that in the fall as we look at trying to look at our budget process internally this fall a little bit sooner. And that's one of the items that we're going to have to talk through is we know that when we develop this budget, we're forecasted to have a $2 million deficit. We know that we're asking $2 million to be rolled over and to be used in this year as well. We're well aware of the 143,000 increase, but we plan to look more intensely at the budget in areas that we may need to come back to council and say that we may not need to do these items or postpone them to a future year.
Okay.
And so that will be work that we'll do over the next several months and into the fall.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Great. I'm not seeing any other But I would like to ask the city manager, and if this isn't appropriate, you tell me. We have new staff that I don't think any of us have met yet. And since they are in the auditorium, I know we've probably emailed. Would it be okay if some of the staff introduce themselves to the council so that we could put a face since people are here in person?
Yes, Madam Mayor. If we can take down the screen, if you don't mind, Mayor, can we start with the ones online?
Yes, that would be, yes, and we
then-
even have folks online, yes.
So those staff that's virtually, department heads, if you could state your name, introduce yourself, and then we'll do the ones here in person.
We see you, Mr. Clark.
You're not new.
Okay. Director Clark, you want to kick us off?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Greg Clark, current recreation director, soon to be acting deputy city manager.
Director
I'm-
King?
Currently.
Chief, you want to go ahead?
Sure. I'm not new, but most everyone's familiar with me. I'm Tony Duvall. I'm the chief of police here in the city.
And I believe we have Ms. Martin as well.
Hello, everyone. This is Renee Martin, ARPA manager, and I think we've all met previously. Good evening to everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Martin.
We have Ms. Wright.
Although I'm not new, but.
No.
Yeah.
Council, Steve Blazek, new IT director since beginning of December.
Good evening. My name is Susan. I'm the finance director.
I'm Jessica Jones. I'm the library director.
Roz Grigsby, Community Development Manager and soon to be acting Deputy City Manager.
Good evening, I'm David Eubanks, Director of Housing and Community Development.
Cheryl Braithwaite, Public Works.
Terrific, all right. Oh.
Madam Clerk?
Jesse Carpenter, city clerk.
All right. Great, thank you. I thank you everyone for doing that. I just felt like you're all here. It was an opportunity, and I think for members of the public who are also watching, who don't get to see you as much as other folks, are very dedicated city staff who we didn't ask some of you questions this evening. So, but we appreciate you being here with us tonight to go over the budget amendment. So, thank you very much for entertaining that request of me this evening. All right, I think are done with the budget amendment. We have a couple of things to come back to for next week before we vote on the first reading. And now it is great pleasure that I turn over to the city manager to discuss the library bids.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We're extremely excited to be bringing this project forward. And this evening, we have a few guests of our library redevelopment project team, and the esteemed honor to turn it over to Director Eubanks to walk us through.
All right. Good evening again, Council. Good to see everyone. This evening, I will be presenting an an update on the library redevelopment project. There will be two critical points within the presentation that have to do with two matters that you'll be voting on next week. I'm joined today by a large number of our project team. We have our construction manager team from Arcadis. Back here in the corner, we also have our architect from RRMM. Joined virtually, we have the project civil engineer, Jason Fritz from AdTech, and we also have our honorees, our guests, Doyle Construction, who we hope to bring on as a part of the project team. Okay, so just as a refresher, excuse me, Ben, is there any way to move the Zoom from off the screen? Perfect. Thank you. So just as a refresher, not that you all need it, but the library redevelopment project will include the demolition of the existing library, which is 9,400 square feet. That'll include the library and the community center. And it'll be replaced by a brand new 19,000 square foot library and community center. The project is also inclusive of renovation of the recreation department and a portion of the city TV space. But as you know, for the community, this library means much more. And I think we heard earlier and previously about what it can do for the community and the hopes and aspirations for what it means. Some of the comments that I've heard from you and others is that this is almost a destination in Tacoma Park. This is the opportunity to welcome folks who haven't been in the city before and kind of show off our character and some of our uniqueness. The facility is going to be replaced, a very old facility, with a modern and functional facility. And it includes some modern features that a lot of our residents would expect in a library. So that's a program room, a children's room, a teen room, private study rooms, updated computer room, and for our staff, new staff area. And as you all have been proponents for, this is a sustainable building. A LEED Gold building is what we're building to. It includes 160 new solar panels and some energy efficient building components. Everything from insulation to triple pane glazing. The cost of this project is $13.8 million. And you all have supported the project in continuing to provide funding for the project over the years. The sources are made up of 4 different components: a bond reserve, a state grant, cable capital grant, and then most recently $4 million in ARPA funds. The uses are relatively simple, and we'll go into some detail. The construction-related costs are $9.7 million. The solar panel installation, which is required in order for us to reach that LEED Gold standard, is about $215,000, and then there's soft costs. Soft costs total about $3.8. And so to talk about the soft costs a little bit, they include all of the costs that are not related to construction. So that's your design and construction team, your design and engineering team, the architect and engineer, the RRMM staff that I mentioned is here with us, the construction manager for construction administration purposes, Arcadis, and then we'll also, as we'll get into a little bit later, we'll have to hire a inspection and material testing firm. That cost is, the estimate is $80,000 to $100,000. There are some non-construction related costs that we have to adhere to in order to reach that LEED Gold standard. And then there's some other more common costs, unique to maybe our project, but common in term. The FFE here is furnishing the library. It is outfitting the library with AVIT equipment, This is finishing equipment. Most of the conduits and most of the electrical components will be all provided by the contractor, but there's some finishing stuff that we may have to do, and some of our staff may be involved in that. And then library shelving is a large number as well. Relocation, we'll also talk a little bit about that later in the presentation, but there'll be some costs associated with moving library staff and moving rec department staff from this location to the lease space that we'll talk about. There's also some costs associated with outfitting that lease space to make sure that it is programmed correctly and that we're able to, particularly for the library, able to continue their services from a remote location. There are kind of your standard building fees and permits, and then there's some miscellaneous costs. That includes potentially some additional landscaping, and then we also have a soft cost contingency here as a hold for any other soft costs that might come up. So on July 20th, you will be voting on an inspection and material firm. The recommendation from city staff is that we proceed with the Hillis Carnes award, and that is for a number of reasons. But the way that we got here is via a requirement by the Department of Permitting Services that essentially says for any structural related inspection, the city, the owner, is required to contract directly with a special inspector is how they term that firm. And this is a requirement from the local building code, but also from the international building code. And so because we have to enter into that contract directly, it's not something that the contractor does. And because of the costs, we reached out to Montgomery County. Montgomery County has existing contracts with 2 vendors. The vendor, as I mentioned, that we are interested in proceeding with is Hillis Carnes. The process for making that decision was an interview. We interviewed both. We received the cost proposal. We took a common scope. There was some variance between the 2 vendors. We used a common scope because this is a time and materials contract, and the most important piece of the contract is going to be the hourly rate. So it was important to have a common scope between the 2 vendors. We applied that common scope to the hourly rate, and the most competitive was Hillis Carnes. And so we feel that both vendors are very capable. There was a competitive process for choosing those that Montgomery County proceeded with via an RFP. And so the recommendation to council is to proceed with the most fiscally responsible of the 2, fiscally responsible for us. Okay, and then to talk a little bit more about the hard costs, as a reminder, back in February 2022, we went through a process where we analyzed 2 estimates. One was from Farella, the other was from DNS. And what that highlighted was that there was the potential for some cost increases for all of the reasons that we're seeing cost increases in the market. Inflation, the fact that contractors are busy, material delays and material shortages. And so council, in preparation for that, allocated an additional $4 million from ARPA for the project. And the budget range, when we received those estimates, was between $9.8 and $11.6 million. So as we were preparing for construction, we decided that it would be really important for us to qualify the contractors, and so we began the process with a request for qualifications in March 2022. That RFQ process involved 15 contractors, and we did used a number of evaluation criteria to really sort through those 15 contractors to decide which of those 15 were best suited for the project. And there were some minimum qualifications, meaning that these were non-point associated criteria, basic evaluation criteria that essentially means that if you didn't check this box, you wouldn't be included at all in the final tier of contractors. There were also some weighted evaluation criteria, and those include the ones that you see here: project experience, personnel qualifications and experience, references, financial data, safety performance, statements of claim, and then statements of failure to complete projects. In terms of project experience, we requested that each contractor provide detail of 5 past projects that were most similar in size and scope. And for the last 7 years, any project that was greater in value than $7 million. For personnel experience, we requested resumes, and we stated in the RFP that the resumes that you provide, those who were assigned to this project remain assigned to this project, and so there's no changing from staff after we enter into a contract without some formal notice and formal approval from city staff. References, we requested 5, and those 5 had to be for the most recent 5 projects. We collected 3 years of audited financial information. We looked at some safety data, OSHA data, accident rates, and some other safety performance indicators. We reviewed statements of claim, and we reviewed statements of failure to complete. So if a contractor was ever terminated from a job or did not finish a job, we had information to assess in that regard as well. And so for the request for, I think there's a slide missing, but either way, of the 12 contractors that the 15 contractors that we received responses from, 12 of the contractors were qualified to move on to the next round, which was the request for proposals. The scoring for the request for qualifications, you had to meet a minimum score of 75. And then of the respondents that we received, I believe the score ranged from 80 to, I want to say 97, I believe it was. Okay. Sorry about all the back and forth, just trying to figure out what's going on with my presentation. Okay, so after the RFQ, we proceeded with the RFP process. 7 of the 12 contractors responded to the RFP. We had some 5 drop out for essentially the same reason. They were all too busy. Although they were proceeding with the process, they were submitting questions. At a certain point in time, they decided that the project was too much for them to handle. But of those of those that remained, 4 were in the amongst the highest rated of those who participated in the RFQ. And so through the RFP process, we received a number of proposals, and the cost range of those proposals was anywhere between $9.2 million and $10.9, and that included some ad alternate costs that were issued as addendums. And I'll go into some more detail, but they were issued as addendums during the RFP to account for some of the changes that happened while the RFP was underway. Of all of the contractors, the one that stood out both as an RFQ respondent but also as an RFP respondent was Doyle Construction. For the RFQ, they were rated 93 of 100. In terms of the quality of their application and their experience. And for the request for proposal, they were the lowest bidder. So they came in at the $9.2 million. If you notice, the range of pricing is fairly in line with the estimates. And so we thought that was a good thing. But also appreciated the fact that we did get one that was on the lower side of those estimates, because ultimately for the project, it allows us to do a lot of the things that we hoped to do but weren't sure that we'd be able to. So in terms of why we decided to move move forward with Doyle. I talked about just their basic criteria, what it meant in the RFQ and how they were qualified, and then obviously the RFP. But to get more specific, in terms of their experience, they've done some recent projects that are very applicable. They're very similar in size and scope. Just to name a few, there was a project in West Virginia in Shepherdstown that was $3.1 million, not similar in scope, but a library for a public institution. They did an Audi dealership in Bethesda, which I'm sure many of us have seen. And then here in the city of Tacoma Park, they completed a $2.7 million project, grocery store, a Lidl grocery store just up the street. Their project management team comes with some really interesting experience, very applicable experience. The lead project manager was also the lead project manager for the Wheaton Library as well as the Elkridge Branch Library. And they're here this evening, so if you have any additional questions, there'll certainly be an opportunity to talk about some detail. And lastly, we did have a conversation with Doyle before making a tentative offer and indicating that we would be making the recommendation to City Council. And the purpose of that meeting was to ensure that the scope of work that was bid on was the scope of work that we had assumed, and that they weren't making any outsized assumptions. And then also to, I think, almost a natural question to ask is, what does it mean to take the lowest bidder, and what are the implications of that? And so we wanted to make sure we understood any implications. And ultimately what we learned via that discussion and some earlier discussions is that Doyle Construction really intentionally came in competitive, and there was no sacrifice on the cost or the specs in any way. They certainly adhered to the specifications of the documentation. All contractors were provided with the contract bid set that's substantially complete. And so they did adhere to that. Where they decided to be more competitive than others was on their profit and overhead. And so, of course, there's questions about whether or not that has implications on their ability to manage a project. And via that conversation, we felt reassured that they were dedicating the appropriate staff and had the appropriate team for the project to be successful. So in terms of the timeline, there are a couple of things that we have to do and processes that we have to proceed with in order to get from where we are to a construction start. The first is to get through the permitting process. And so you can break down the remaining permitting steps into two. There's the permitting steps that the Department of Permitting Services at Montgomery County is responsible for, and then there are the utility permits. In terms of the DPS permits, the keystone here and the thing that once approved will have a cascading effect is the floodplain and sediment control study. And so we are at what we believe is the final stages of the back and forth that is permitting. And we're responding to what we think is the last round of regulatory comments. Once we get that approval, what will happen is the site permit will be approved. That's just pending the floodplain approval, and this is the same for the building permit. Also just kind of waiting for the floodplain study approval to come through. The utility permits, WSSC is also dependent on the floodplain study. And the one independent permit is the State Highway Administration. We are still responding to regulatory comments here, but we believe that this is also at the end of the conversation between us and SHA. We have permit comments to submit. We expect to do that in the next week and a half. The challenge is the backlog at SHA in terms of the review. And so we've, to the best of our ability, are trying to account for any delays that might come from that process in our construction timeline. And we've had conversations with the project team as well as early conversations with Doyle Construction about what that would look like. And we don't think that there are any negative implications at this point. Okay, and I will pause here. As I mentioned, virtually, we have Jason Fritz from AdTech. He is our project civil engineer. I know that throughout this process, there have been questions about stormwater, and so the hope is that through Jason's presentation, we'll be able to address some of those concerns. And of course, there'll be more than ample time to ask questions afterwards too. So Jason, would you mind kicking us off?
Sure. Thanks, David. Hi, my name's Jason Fritz, civil engineer. I work for AdTech Engineers. So just wanted to go down through the couple of items that were on the last slide. The first is, how has the library redevelopment project allowed the city to improve its stormwater infrastructure? So the redevelopment of the site has allowed the new building and site improvements to meet current MDE stormwater regulations for water quality. Additionally, these facilities will provide some mitigation of stormwater events from a quantity standpoint before entering the public storm drain system in Philadelphia Avenue. It's noted that the design also increases the size of a portion of the storm drain system from 48 inches to 66 inches, again, in Philadelphia Avenue. What design features are incorporated into the library design to mitigate flooding? So first of all, the new library building floor elevation will be 1 foot above the 100-year floodplain elevation to eliminate flooding within the building. This is a requirement of the county as well as FEMA. 2 microbiorotention facilities are placed between the building and Philadelphia Avenue. These pick up primarily the building and some of the existing parking lot or repaved areas of the parking lot. These are primarily water quality facilities, but they will provide attenuation to flooding for larger events. These water quality facilities handle the 1-year storm event, and then obviously anything above that, they will detain water for as well. In addition, the increase of the size of the public storm drain system, which I mentioned previously, is going to be rerouted, again, upsized, which is going to improve the hydraulics and reduce upstream inlet surcharges, i.e. during a storm event, less water will be surcharging out of the storm drain system upstream. What constraint limits on the project's ability to further expand stormwater improvements? As you all may be aware, the site's extremely tight. Outside the library expansion, there's a public WSSC sanitary sewer with an associated easement, as well as the relocated storm drain system, which I previously mentioned, which really prohibit any additional stormwater management. The easement takes up a good portion of that space between the building and the right-of-way for Philadelphia Avenue. Describe the role of the floodplain study in the development of the project development, and how is the study used and what are its limitations? The floodplain study and building layout were reviewed concurrently to ensure the library development was maximized and that the floodplain would not adversely impact the new building and adjacent properties. The study is a requirement of DPS due to the drainage area size and has been used to establish the floor elevations of electrical transformers, as well as flood-prone areas through the Philadelphia Avenue corridor. The floodplain study prepared is done using DPS requirements, which mimics those of FEMA. Floodplain studies typically are extremely conservative. They ignore things such as water flowing in the storm drain system. They basically assume that all the water flows above grade at the surface, that all the storm drain pipes, inlets, et cetera, are clogged. Studies are often limited by accurate base topography. We used aerial topography here along with field run cross sections. Obstructions such as ice or debris, down trees. That's obviously outside of the study as to what could happen during a storm event within flow channels, roads, etc., and other phenomena such as erosion or, a hurricane, something of that nature.
Thank you, Jason. Okay, and just to give you some context for the timeline for construction, you on July 20th will have the opportunity to vote on the contractor. After the vote, should Doyle be allowed to proceed, there'll be a period where we'll be negotiating and executing the contract itself. Once we execute that contract, we will, once we execute the contract, the important thing to note here is that the pricing that was negotiated with, or that we received via the cost proposal is a permanent price. So should there be any fluctuations in the market that the subcontractor is attempting to pass along to the contractor, we have a lump sum contract. And so we don't have to incur any additional costs. That assumes, though, that we execute the contract within 60 days. And so September 4th is the deadline. The Doyle Construction and others had the opportunity to review a draft contract as a part of the RFP. So they're familiar with the contract. Any questions that they might have are pending your approval. Mid-August, we'll issue the partial notice to proceed. What that would allow the contractor to do is begin procurement, again, as a mitigant against any cost increases. And then in late September of this year, we'll issue the full notice to proceed. The contractor, via the summary construction schedule that we received so far, will begin with site work, and then the demolition of the library itself is expected to occur in late November. The total project timeline is 18 months, and so we expect to wrap this up in early spring, April 2024, thereabout. The other things that we have to consider and consider quickly over the next couple of weeks are a relocation strategy and a communication strategy. So in preparation for relocation, we have taken 2 steps. We've begun conversations with a professional relocation service, which we anticipate being provided by Arcadis. And that will involve coordination with the contractor, should the contractor have started laying down procured items in the parking lot, if the contractor starts fencing things off, ensuring that when a mover comes in, that they have enough room to do what they need to do. It'll also assist with making sure that we're thinking through exactly what's required to move all of the library stuff out of the library and into a new facility. They'll assist us with the outfitting of the new lease space. So the furnishing of that space, the layout, and it'll also help us think through exactly the programming of the library in that space. So having them on board and thinking about it in a systematic way, having a person who's intimately familiar with the process thus far, continuing on providing some additional services in that way, we feel is very beneficial. And then internally, we formed a task force. A task force is composed of departmental staff, those that'll be impacted by the services, the disruption of services. So it's essentially most of the department heads. And so we're meeting right now on a weekly basis. A smaller team of us is meeting and having almost daily conversations about what it means to try to make this transition a reality. The next step, and it's not really a next step, it's a simultaneous step really, is finalizing the lease. And so you'll hear about the finalizing of the lease again in coming sessions and via the city manager's office. As I mentioned, we'll also have to begin outfitting and laying out that space. That involves potentially renting furniture. It involves running new telecom lines to ensure that where we place a desk, there's space for a phone and an internet connection. We'll also have to work strategically through the moving and storing of items, both for the library, but also for the rec center. The game room will need to be emptied. And some of the other recreation spaces, the recreation office will also have to be moved and or stored. So a lot of consideration there. Again, reason for us to hire some professional help. And then we also have to, very importantly, consider the service impact, both short-term, immediate, and long-term service impact. And so that task force, part of the job of that task force, is to figure out what does service look like moving forward here and at the satellite location. And so that'll be an ongoing conversation. The communication strategy, the intent is to make the communication strategy very, very robust. And so we'll be attacking the publishing and sharing that information in a very strategic way, hitting all outlets, in-person gatherings, printed media, digital media. And the purpose is really to have a coordinated communication approach that addresses both our internal needs and staffing requirements, but also our external stakeholders, primarily our residents. They will be, of course, impacted by the demolition, by the schools for parking, for parents dropping off and picking up children. And so all of that communication will have to happen in advance of any particular incident. And so the plan is to constantly and continuously give information at bare minimum on a bi-weekly basis. We'll also have a website, and that website will have regular updates about the construction process, the construction schedule, any changes, so on and so forth. In terms of the means through which we intend to provide this information, the list here is not comprehensive. This is just a short list of the things that we hope to provide information through. We'll certainly begin with a community in-person recorded, also Zoom available community meeting to kick off, to provide that initial information about timing, construction start, implications for parking, so on and so forth. As I mentioned, we'll have the webpage. We'll also publish information on the Insider, the newsletter on a regular basis. For those that are signed up for Tacoma Alerts, they'll receive alerts. We'll have signage all over the place in the immediate vicinity. And we'll also be sharing information via social media and also radio. And City TV, I think, is going to be trying to incorporate some interesting storytelling along the way too. Okay, and so if you all have any questions, comments, or concern, I'm available to answer, as well as the project team. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eubanks, for that very thorough presentation, for all your work on it. And I just want to thank again Ms. Malinoff for coming this evening. I think you summed up many of our feelings regarding this project, so there's no need to go over all of that. But Mr. Eubanks, as you started off by saying, this library means a great deal to this community, to a number of the members of it, and we're so glad to see us moving forward. Before I turn it over to my colleagues, I think one question I had, if you don't mind, since we have the folks from Doyle here, love to hear you speak for a moment about this project, what attracts you about it. As Mr. Eubanks noted, your bid did come in lower than the other groups. We do appreciate that, but also would like to hear from you all. What is it about this project that Doyle's would like to work on and partner with the city on it?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ranteg Rao. I'm the Vice President of Pre-Construction at Doyle. With me, I have Kevin. He's one of our VP of Operations, and he's going to be the lead PM who's also going to be overseeing this project. I've lived in this area. I live in Bethesda for the past 11 years. I attended undergrad and grad school at Maryland, so I've spent a decent amount of time in and around this area. At a personal level, I'm really fond of libraries. I enjoy reading, and anytime we see a job come through, which is a library, we like to hit it pretty hard. The last job, which we just wrapped up, is the Shepherdstown Library. Kevin again was leading that project. I think we have a ribbon cutting next week, next Friday. So from our side, we had the team wrapping up that job, and we saw this RFP come through for Tacoma Park, and it was a perfect job to segue into. So we had a team that had just wrapped up a library project, and this was going to be a good home for our team. So from a bid standpoint, I guess the numbers reflect that we put a decent amount of time and effort into this bid. Our operations team that's going to be involved, Kevin and his team, were heavily involved in the bidding process, and they understand the deliverables really well. So we come fully prepared to deliver a successful project for your team. And any and all questions that you might have right now, I will be more than welcome to answer them for you. Do you have anything else to add?
So this will be my 4th library that I've helped bid. I've really had the privilege of building a lot of buildings for the community. Montgomery County, Howard County, really Maryland. I do like the aspect that, yes, I mean, obviously we're in a business, but just giving back to the community. I take pride in every building that I've ever built. And it'll be no different here. So I really appreciate the opportunity, and I feel like our bid obviously reflected how we feel about this building. I've worked with numerous people on the design team already. So and Arcadis as well. So I think we really have a good team ready for this project.
Great. Thank you very much. And I will turn it over first to, Councilman DeBala.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who participated in putting this presentation together, and more importantly, in getting us to this point. I am so excited that we are at this point. That if you go to the library at 3 o'clock on a weekday during school time, you just see the range of people in this community that rely on the library and its services. And to have functional, adequate space, facility, not just the facilities, but the services, is just so important to this community. So having said all that, thank you for addressing all the questions I sent in earlier this week. There's one that I wanted to follow up on. So you did very, in great detail, explain about the request for qualifications. And I'm very excited that Doyle is one of the top RFQ. I'm really glad that we did that process, because it gives me a great deal of comfort at this point. I know I wasn't so sold on it at first, but I'm really glad we did it now. My question is about the RFP. So you have the RFP scores, and they were based on primarily on the bid price?
Yeah, I think
or
that,
what are the factors there?
Yeah, so I think that was the slide that I was missing.
Yeah, I thought it might have been.
The RFP scores were heavily weighted to the cost proposal. 90% of the RFP score was cost proposal. The other 10% of the RFP score was the RFQ score.
And just to clarify, so you didn't just take the bottom number and say, oh, this bid was this amount and that bid was that amount. There was a great deal of detail in each of the proposals about categories of cost and responsiveness to the details of I'm asking the question, is this true, to the details of the RFP in terms of materials and supplies and types of construction and then all the plans that we had seen earlier. So I gather the review team went through all of that pretty carefully.
So it's an interesting process. The contractors are provided with the construction bid set that includes the specifications. There's also a process of by which contractors have the opportunity to ask questions. And so that process is essentially questions are submitted throughout the process, and there are essentially designated times in which we provide answers. In all, we received, I think it's 172 questions and provided 172 answers. Some of those were just written responses.
Wow.
Some of them required some additional specification detail from the architect or some of the subcontractors underneath the architect, the electrical engineer or the civil engineer. And so there's a significant amount of back and forth to clarify things in the specifications and in the design work. That is the process through which contractors have the opportunity to get clarity on things. And so the bids that we receive are they are detailed in the sense that there are line items, I forget how many, and those line items are lump sums of many subcategories. And so what we did was review across all 7 of the respondents the variances in each of those line items.
Wow.
And try to get a sense for where there was any significant discrepancies.
Yeah.
We didn't get the sense through that analysis that there was any large discrepancy from any contractor. And where we did have a sense of, where we did have any concerns, we had the opportunity to ask questions. And so one of the ones was profit and overhead for Doyle, and they gave a very adequate answer. So I think the answer to your question is there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of clarity that happens throughout the process. And at the end of it all, there are quite a few conversations and opportunities that we have to clarify with the final bidder exactly what their assumptions were to ensure that their assumptions were in line with the specifications and what we actually intend to see in the finished product.
Okay, great, thanks. Just a couple of quick things. So I assume you'll be posting the presentation so that everyone that wants to see it can see it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I appreciate your putting in the costs, the cost slides so that we could see how this fits in with the bigger project. That is very helpful in reassuring us that we've allocated certain amounts of money that all together, come up with enough to do what we want to do here. And I think the equity statement doesn't do justice to how impactful this project is going to be. And last but not least, when you do communications, do not forget the Friends of the Library.
Do not forget.
Forget the Friends of the Library.
Friends of the Library, right.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Devala. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Eubanks. A few questions. So you talked about the contract, and on this contract with Doyle, they would be the general contractor, not a PM, right? Project manager.
They would be the general contractor.
Right. And so how would they handle subcontractors because on the Flower Avenue project, we had some issues with subcontractors. Once they have locked in the deal with the subcontractor, do those subcontractors have to stay with the project throughout the term of the project, or can they swap them out?
Do you guys want to answer?
I mean, they would stay with the project throughout the whole process.
Okay.
I'm sorry to ask you, sorry, if you don't, the folks watching on TV can't hear you if you don't go to the mic. I'm
Oh,
sorry
sorry
to ask you that. I'm sorry.
So yes, the subcontractors would stay throughout the whole project.
Okay.
Yep.
And the contract is for, I can't remember the term that you used, but a general contract. This is the price of the contract. So if there are cost overruns, how are those handled with this type of contract?
Thanks, guys. Lump sum contract was
Yes,
the
lump sum.
terminology.
Thank you.
And Doyle, like many contractors, are sophisticated in this kind of work, and they anticipate things like cost adjustments, cost increases, escalation. This is an 18-month project.
Right.
Cost today may not be the same cost 12 months from now.
Right.
And so with their expertise, the expectation is that they include some adjustment in their numbers to accommodate some of the price adjustments that might happen over time.
Okay, so, but if there is a price adjustment, does the council have to consider that price adjustment, or does the Doyle company eat that price adjustment?
So the council does not have to consider the price adjustment. The lump sum contract, once we sign and execute that contract, is what it is. I will note that we are carrying a 5% construction contingency. That's not so much to account for price adjustments in the contract, but it is to account for scope adjustments. So as a for instance, if something that was priced, something that wasn't priced comes up and it's not in the scope, not something that's an oversight,
Right.
But something that is an additional scope item that nobody perceived. We start trying to do some of the site work, and we're planning to install this new stormwater line, and we hit something that nobody knew was there. That is a scope adjustment, and that would require a change order. There's a process for evaluating change orders to make sure that the proposed price is a true and competitive price. And our construction management team will be reviewing both the time that the contractor suggests is needed, as well as the materials. And so there'll be a process for evaluation there. But that contingency is really to account for that. The price that's offered under the scope that we have, once we execute the contract, is the price that we proceed with from now until the project is completed.
Okay. So materials used in the project, let's say they're rated high quality, middle, low. Do we know what quality materials will be used in this project? Are these going to be the best of the best, or?
They'll be the best of the best.
Okay. All right. I saw the itemized list of the costs, right? And I didn't see, and I may have missed it, anything regarding stormwater management. Is that like a separate expenditure that we'll consider, or?
You're talking about the list of prices,
Right.
and then the total price?
Right.
You're saying you didn't see stormwater specifically listed
Right.
out? Yeah, it's probably, I don't know exactly what the tiers were, but it would be included probably in your site work. So
Okay.
if there's my guess is that it's included in the site work section. It's not another attachment that will be added to the contract at some point later.
Okay.
The only attachment, if you will, is the ad alt, which was the $80,000 adjustment.
Right.
Doyle's estimate was $80,000 for the upgraded stormwater line.
Okay. And, I had to step away for a minute. So you were talking about the swing space, and that's at the rec center, right? That's going to be the place where you're going to house.
The lease space.
The lease space, right?
Yes, yeah.
Right.
So that lease space is, I don't know the address, it's the Old Salvation Army location.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah, and that hasn't been finalized, and we'll be presenting, I think, some information to you about that. That'll come from the city manager's office.
Okay.
But that's the space that we're eyeing at the moment.
And do you have an estimate on the cost, or?
The cost that we've included, with the cost estimate that we've received for a 3-year lease, the 3-year lease would accommodate both the library redevelopment, but also the atrium infill. And so that's why 3 years is of interest. The cost is about $670,000, I think.
Okay.
654 says City Manager Fox.
And I just want to be clear, as far as, we really can't disclose exactly who the entity that we are engaged with at this moment.
Right.
That will be forthcoming.
Right, okay, thank you. And then, when you look at your matrix here, I'm trying to make sure I understand it, right? And when it talks about project performance, and then it goes proposal, source of information, UON, and then it says Shepherd's Public Library, 3.5 million, I guess that's the total cost of the project, correct?
Yes.
And then it says 522, is that when the project was delivered?
What are you looking at, Councilmember?
It's your matrix under, you have all of the contractors, and then there's this matrix that has the project performance, their weighting factor, score, weighted score, but there's a piece there that has, the past experience. And so I'm just trying to understand, is the 522 the date the project was delivered?
Did you guys finish up in 522?
No.
I'm not sure.
All right.
Sorry.
And so then it says CO, is that cost overrun? And then it has a dollar figure?
I'm really not sure. I'd have to take a look at what you're looking at.
All right, and then it goes on for Bethesda, Lytle, Elk Ridge Library, and the Wheaton Project. Same thing, I just didn't understand what these acronym meant, so. All right, thank you.
Sorry, I couldn't answer your question. I'll take a look at it afterwards and get you an email response.
Okay.
Thank you. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. I thank you for this presentation tonight. I was impressed with the breadth of your presentation. I had a list here of things that I wanted to make sure you had on there, and you had everything that I had thought of, with 3 exceptions, and I just wanted to touch base on those. When Jason was talking about the stormwater, I didn't hear him make any reference to the stormwater retention facility that's underneath the parking lot in front. I just wanted to make sure that he was aware of that. And
Jason, do you just want to comment briefly on the stormwater retention ponds?
Sure. So we are aware of the underground detention facility that sits below the lower parking where the police station is. Although we are increasing the pipe size that goes into that structure will remain. Just one end of it's going to be constructed to accept the larger size pipe, but that structure will remain as a detention facility underneath the parking lot.
okay, I thank you. I just wanted to make sure that was on your plate there, that you were aware of that. Other thing I wanted to know was the underground parking, that some of this construction is going to be over top of some of the underground parking. And just wondered if there was any change to that. Is it going to continue to be used during construction, or is anything changing in regard to that parking?
There'll be some foundation work that has to be done there. Maybe this is something that the architect can give you more detail on. I don't think that we lose any parking. The space is still going to be available. I'm just not sure about how much parking we might lose.
Okay. I see a gentleman behind you coming this way.
Good evening. As David mentioned, he's correct that there will not be a loss of parking by the work that's taking place on the lower level, but there will have to be caution and obviously schedule coordination to ensure that no damage occurs to people or equipment while work is being done in the area.
So there's some times when it may not be available during the construction.
That is likely. That timing will need to be coordinated across the contractor as well as the project management team with Arcadis, and of course ourselves and the city staff will be.
And that's primarily used by the police department, so I'm sure they can coordinate with you. And then lastly, thank you. Lastly, I was glad to see that you had mentioned the communications task force is vital with all this work going on around here. And I was also happy to see that you had mentioned the schools. I would just encourage you to reach out to the schools now rather than waiting, because some of the impacts on them may be significant, as you
Right.
said, with the dropping off and picking up kids and using our facility as parking and as a pass-through area, so,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. We started some of those conversations, and it's been on our radar for quite a while.
Great. Ma'am.
Councilwoman Costick.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I'm really excited to see us moving forward on this and to have this bid. I think I was worried about what the total was going to come in as, and this is really great news. So most of my questions have actually already been asked, which is great, and answered. I did have just two sort of more logistical questions. One was thinking ahead in terms of coordination with the atrium. You mentioned the atrium project as well. I assume there'll be some coordination and kind of collaboration across those two projects to make sure everybody can get in and do what they need to do as they're doing it.
Absolutely. It's a concern for sure, both from a ability to deliver services, but also just safety. Having two sizable projects like that at two opposite ends of the community center and maintaining egress will be critical. And so we haven't fully started exploring that just because we don't have a definitive timeline for the atrium yet. But it's high priority coordinating between the two projects should they be happening at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then my second question is more about timing than cost, but Director Braithwaite earlier mentioned some of the supply chain issues with regard to the work on the multifamily buildings. And I'm just curious, kind of based on what you're seeing, is there any sense that there might be delays in kind of being able to get this finished on time based on just getting the supplies that you need?
Yeah, and Doyle can comment on this more if I don't answer the question to your satisfaction. But the biggest delay, I think, that contractors are seeing in the market for projects like this is related to HVAC equipment. And part of what we hope to do by by issuing the partial notice to proceed is to allow the contractor to begin procurement. So there'll be potentially a month difference between when we issue the partial notice to proceed and when we actually start construction. But once that contract is executed, Doyle or whomever the contractor may be, will want to start procuring and solidifying their contracts with subcontractors as soon as possible to lock in some of those prices and to start delivery and such. So I think the earlier we can begin to procure, the better off we are. Of course, we have to demo the building first. We've got some foundation work to do. Doyle's construction schedule has them starting with site work. And so I think there's quite a bit of time before things like HVAC need to be on site and when we'll begin procuring items like that. So it would be a horrible way to start off if I were to say that we anticipate delays. So no, we don't anticipate any delays. We expect to get construction completed in 18 months.
Very good. Great. Well, I'm excited. Thank you.
Councilwoman Searcy.
Great. Well, one of the joys of being at the tail end is a lot of questions have already been asked. But I want to thank everyone who's come out and presented, and thank you, Mr. Eubanks. This has been a fantastic presentation. You had me at lump sum contract. I was sold. I think that one of the things that I really appreciate in terms of the approach that you all have outlined are the number of safeguards that we have in place to ensure that we're able to stay on budget. So from the lump sum contract structure to the 5% contingency, to having contract managers that can actually kind of stay on track of things. I think all of that together is going to be just really critical, ensuring that the project stays on budget, but also that we are working to finish this project on time because it is such a valuable asset to the community. So you had mentioned the construction contingency, that 5%. Does that 5% also includes any potential overruns in terms of soft costs?
So there's also a soft cost contingency.
Okay.
I think the contingency at the moment is $185,000.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Well, again, thank you all so much. That's the only question I have.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
And thank you all for your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Eubanks, first of all, for the presentation. I appreciate it, and to the representatives from Doyle and the others. I had a few questions, and then if my colleagues will indulge me, just a few general comments I wanted to make also. But to the questions first. So if I understand correctly, and I think this was in the slides, we had the two different estimates earlier in the year for the potential costs, and one was 9.8 million, one was 11.2 million. And owing to the generosity and savvy of Doyle, that's came in at 9.2. So that's 2 million less than the upper end. And so even with the soft costs and some extra there for the testing requirements for the county and so on, and the contingency, which is us, not what Doyle would do if they get the job. Maybe you can just explain how we still get to the 13.8, because it seems like there could be some extra room in there.
Yeah.
If the question makes sense.
It absolutely. And I'm sorry, I anticipated the question and I meant to include a slide and I didn't. I can give you a much more detailed answer via email. But essentially, some of the things that we had hoped to accomplish, we're not able to do. One of them is simply the lease space. The lease space, we weren't sure we were going to actually be able to lease. We thought that we may need to figure out an alternative. We also had different lease schedules, if you will. So 3 years is the one that allows us the most accommodations for, as I said, both the atrium and the library. So that's a luxury that we wouldn't have otherwise had. The pursuit of the solar installation, that cost has increased because we can now actually pursue the LEED Gold standard that we intend to pursue with the installation of the new system. There were the special inspector wasn't a cost that we had initially assumed in the original budget. And we've added some flex in that estimate. We expect that to come in at $80,000, but we've thrown in another $20,000 just to account for anything that we are unsure about if the project does continue beyond 18 months. There are little things like the relocation specialists that we're bringing on board that I would consider a luxury item. Otherwise, that would have had to be done in-house. But I think it's much easier on staff, and I think it gives everybody a level of comfort, having a professional coordinate those services. The outfitting of the lease space, because we weren't sure we were going to proceed with the lease space, is an additional expense. And there are quite a few others that I can't really recall, but I can give you a full list. When I did the list earlier, the additions came to about $1.8 million, so there was still about $200,000 that I couldn't account for, but I thought the 1.8 was pretty close, and I can give you that detail.
So I guess my only question would be, you know, even though the bid is low, if the 5% contingency were exceeded, you know, for the unanticipated kinds of things that you mentioned that could come up, if we're using all of that extra that we got by virtue of having their low bid, it doesn't leave us a lot of flexibility.
Well, the 5% contingency existed
right
before, and it
right.
will continue to
right.
exist. That the money from which we're pulling to allow for these luxury items, if you will. Luxury is not the right word to
right.
use. It's items that we were unsure that we would be able to incorporate, that are really important items, but things that if we absolutely bare bones had to make a decision between it and getting the project done, the priority would be getting the project done. I think, I'm sorry, Councilman, I lost track of your
Well, no, I guess my
question.
only question is if something comes up that exceeds the contingency, we've kind of absorbed the rest of the savings that we get from Doyle.
The answer is yes. If we exceed the 5% contingency, there's no money has been allocated from council beyond the $13.8 million.
Well,
But
yeah,
I will add, I'll add to that we did a contingency analysis very early in the project, and the construction manager really went through the potential unknowns as a part of the risk analysis process that we hired the construction manager to do, and looked at potential costs in detail and felt pretty firmly that the 5% contingency was enough to cover any unknowns.
All right, well, if you can send me that would be helpful.
Yeah, sure.
Just in terms of the lower bid, which we've just been discussing, so I think if I got it correct, you mentioned, and it's great to have a area company like based in Rockville, which we have here, like Doyle. You mentioned that they went lower in particular on their overhead and profits. And so is it fair to say that for the other higher ranking bidders, that on most of the costs, they were about the same, and just those companies didn't come down as low on overhead and profit margin? Is that?
I think generally, yes. The biggest variance between what we saw from Doyle and what we saw from some of the other contractors was in the profit and overhead. I think too, and I can't comment but so much on a contractor strategy, but I will say that organizations of differing size have different overhead costs.
Right. I mean, a big company that's multi-state and has 500
Right.
employees.
And as a for instance, we had a very large company that was interested in the bid, and some of the feedback that we got from them was that they, given the applicant pool, respondent pool, they didn't feel that they would be competitive.
Just because they would need to take more in profit given their size and all their other associated expenses.
That was the inference, yeah.
Okay, so a couple other things. On stormwater, I appreciate the presentation from Mr. Fritz. And the question I have is, we have the current system we have, and then under this proposal, the entry point and so on would be expanded. What I would like to get is some sort of sense for, here's the capacity that we have currently, and here's how much we're generally using of that capacity, because one of the things that, look, we're on record as saying we think due to climate change there's going to be increased stormwater flows. We're voting on or discussing rather later this evening, a contract on that very point, and we backed the state law to try to adjust those numbers. And so it's important, I think, for folks who are paying attention to that point to perceive that there's additional capacity on site that we're not currently using at an average time or even a medium-sized storm. So if we can have that information, and I hope I'm asking it in a way that's meaningful.
It's also beyond my area of expertise, but I do understand your question, and we'll get you the information.
Okay. And then in terms of the impact on the neighborhood, which I'm glad you mentioned, I mentioned this a number of times myself over the last few years with the building project that's going on in North Tacoma connected to Montgomery College. We developed a short page or two set of protocols on how the construction firm and the city could be involved in, and obviously would interact with the neighborhood. And so you mentioned biweekly online meetings, and, there were things like agreements on what hour of day certain types of activity, but particularly if it's noisy, would start, 24-hour number for people to call if they had concerns. It was a whole series of things like that, and it really made a difference, I think, in terms of how the communication between the residents and the college and their contractor worked. And so I would suggest we do a version of that, and I can share the document with you. It doesn't have to be identical, but it just set in place a process. So when things did have to diverge, today we got to stay late and work on a noisy thing because of some reason connected to the construction, there was a process for informing the community of that, as opposed to people just suddenly getting ready to go to bed and there was this loud thing. So I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'll circulate that to the staff and you can share it with the company.
Absolutely.
I think we should do a version of that. And then just a couple of other things, if we got a minute. So I'm getting a lot of questions about this, a lot of questions from a lot of people, and I just think it's important for me to make just a few additional comments. I don't have any other questions for you right now. I support the project. I'm glad to see that we've got this competitive bid. I understand there are people against it, and I'm not going to change their mind by what I'm saying, but just a few points. When I got on the council, and that was in 2015, in December 2015, there was a staff recommendation, and it was presented to us in January. I checked back on this. That was for $3.75 million. So in my time, that was the starting point, $3.75 million, around a 50% increase in square footage. And so if you think about that, if we borrowed that versus the $7 million we did borrow, the annual payments, it's a difference of about $180,000 estimate. And that's maybe a little more than 0.5% if our budget's $30 million. And so the big reason I thought we should expand that was because of the Americans with Disabilities Act. That proposal, the roughly 50% increase, meant fewer books and less public space because the stacks had to be wider and lower. So to me, spending close to $4 million and then ending up with less public space and fewer books just didn't seem to make sense. So that was why I pushed for the expansion. And in the end, you cited the four, Mr. Eubanks, you cited the four categories of expenditure. The $7 million we borrowed, we're paying it back with interest from Maryland. So that's a direct impact on our budget, and that flows right to our property taxes, and we pay about $390,000 a year out of the budget for that. But the others, they're off budget. Now, people may say, I don't care if it's off budget because they're against the project. But my goal has been, among other things, I want it to be a good project, but in terms of the cost, to avoid us having to have any more spending beyond that $7 million we borrowed and to pay that off with interest. And this enables us to be there if we're careful. The things that affected the increase, one was the county requirement for us to raise the budget. That contributed heavily to the increase in the cost. And with that $3.75 million one, we would have had the same thing. So that probably would have pushed that up to between $5 and $6 million. If we'd gotten that thing in and done before COVID hit, maybe that would have been it. But once the redesign had been done and COVID hit, that was the reason for the second big round of increases. So other than that first shift, and I just want people to understand that, from the $3.75 million to the larger expansion, all the other cost increases were not things the city decided to add on. The county added one, and the rest was required by COVID. And so I'll just say two other things, and I'm really stopping. There's been a lot of talk about the Silver Spring Library. I think, honestly, if you go look at the Silver Spring Library, if you don't like it, and then go look at the images of this, they look very, very different. There's only one story high. And so people may not like it, but it's only one story high. And some people have said it'll go all the way out to Pennsylvania Avenue. But it doesn't go all the way out to Pennsylvania Avenue, right? It's well short of Pennsylvania Avenue. I don't know if we have an image of that, but I think it would be important to see that. And then, right, so that'll give you kind of an idea. And the big curve section is new. The rest of it is about the same as it was before. And then last, just on ARPA, we approved spending a lot of ARPA funding on direct assistance. It came up tonight. We're going to be talking about that in the next few weeks. There's money for affordable housing. There's direct payments to individuals. Yes, there's some expenditures for infrastructure. And I just want to say, ARPA was not specifically limited only to helping those who've been harmed by COVID. That's a big part of it. We're spending money on that. But another part of it is infrastructure projects, and specifically projects that, because of COVID, otherwise municipalities wouldn't be able to do. And this is an example of that. We designed the project. We thought we were getting close to being ready to go with it. COVID would have put it out of reach for us. And so using some of those funds to pay for it, to me, is reasonable, as long as plenty of the funds are also being spent on these other things. So I'm just going to say that's my overall sense. I would like to get those questions that I referred to answered. Believe it or not, that was a lot shorter than I thought I was going to talk about, but that gives you a general idea. And I just thought it was important for me to make those comments. People who are watching can obviously feel free to get in touch with me further about it, but I appreciate all the information and looking forward to talking more. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Kovar. Mr. Eubanks, thank you so much. Thank you to the folks from Doyle and the architecture firm and everyone who is here this evening. It was a very thorough, wonderful presentation. And it is with great pleasure that I say we will be voting on this next week. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you all.
We'll move now down to our work session on the procurement for construction management services for the community center renovation. I'll turn it back to the city manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And just one kudos I'd like to give out before getting into this one. On the library project, just want to give thanks not only Director Eubanks, but Director Jones and Deputy City Manager Clark for their great work in bringing this project forward. Now, the other great project we're excited to bring forward is the construction management services contract for the community center renovations. Director Braithwaite.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'll try to keep this short because we got another big E coming up right behind this. But as you know, the next step in the process of moving the community center renovation forward, we've gone through the architectural services, and the council's approved the architectural design funding, and that contract is underway and moving towards completing the design itself. The next step is to bring on our construction management team to basically guide us through pre-construction phase as well as during construction, and then most importantly the wrap-up and post-construction. As I think you probably gathered from the work that's been done on the library so far, we are very pleased to be working with Arcadis. They're gone. But they've been excellent partners, and the value that they've brought to the city and to the they've just refined our process in terms of making sure we've protected the city's interest, gone through the design plan with a fine-tooth comb, and they've really elevated our ability to respond, react, plan, discuss. They've just been critical in providing that piece. As you may recall, the city awarded a contract to Arcadis after the city staff went through a process. We interviewed construction management firms that were approved by Montgomery County through a competitive bid process, the Department of General Services. Through that interview process, we made a recommendation for bringing Arcadis on, and the intention was to use them not only for the library project, but for the community center renovation project as it got underway. And so that's what we're bringing forth in terms of a work session discussion tonight. We have got a proposal from Arcadis for the phases that I mentioned, and there I won't repeat it. It's detailed in the cover sheet. There's a whole paragraph on the services they'll provide, very similar to what was provided in the library process in terms of pre-construction, with the exception of value engineering. Given the size of this project, they really did not recommend that we go through a value engineering exercise. There just isn't the size of the construction dollars that would make that, they thought, a very fruitful experience. So they will be doing cost estimating, construction management, risk assessment, constructability phase. So all those steps we'll be going through with them in the pre-construction phase. We anticipate having final architectural drawings completed in July. So that's the timing now of trying to get the construction management services awarded, so that once those drawings are complete, they can then be shifted over to Arcadis for them to do what they do in terms of evaluating and coordinating the discussion about the process, reviewing the drawings, making any recommendations and changes, and also provide us, most importantly, a cost estimate number that we can use to reality check our assumptions, given where things are in the state of construction today and how long this project has sort of been in the works. It has started and stopped for at least 4 years. And through that process, much like the libraries, it has evolved and it has changed. And now what we're seeing is the use of the space for the community health partnerships, the mental health counselors, a lot more public interface and space. And most importantly, one of the things I think that will be kind of revolutionary to this building is that close-in of the floor between the first floor and the second floor. That's going to create a plaza in our entranceway that has never before been there, and that'll be incredibly useful. And again, kudos to Councilmember Siemens for initially raising that idea and getting that light bulb turned on for us in that. So that will be a really essential part of the process. I think that's pretty much it. We've got a bid proposal or a cost proposal from Arcadis. We've reviewed it and feel it's quite reasonable. I just want to point out that it is a time and materials contract, so we only pay for services we actually get. If it turns out that we can't move this project to construction in the current time frame and we need to sort of permanently or partially, temporarily shut it down, we only expend the funds that the hours that were actually used, the processes that were actually provided. So the city is not on the hook for the full contract amount. And in fact, it's a fairly conservative estimate in terms of the number of hours assigned to each piece. One of the things that will be really effective and efficient in having these two projects not on top of each other but working in tandem will be that the construction management services that Arcadis can provide by being both the construction manager for the library project and the community center project will just be incredibly helpful for coordination, communication, working out which part of the building needs to be impacted where, parking, storage, who's got a crane, all that stuff will be run through the construction management services, and having that one single, almost like a traffic cop for the two projects, I think will be a very, very helpful process. Where we'll go from here once we get the construction management team on board will be to follow the lessons learned from the library project, issue an RFQ so we pre-qualified contractors, then issue the RFP so we can look at best price and then award that contract. Realistically thinking, we're not looking at the RFP process going out before the end of the year, so it really would be something that we would anticipate starting January and beyond in terms of bringing that back to you for a potential contract award for a construction partner. So we'll have this for next 6 months with the library ramping up and get started before we, move into that next phase of the community center renovation project. I don't know if you have any other questions. At this point, happy to answer them.
Great. Just one quick question. I know this item has been budgeted in our budget, so this is coming in at budget or below. Is that correct?
Yes, we had both $200,000 in fiscal year '22 that was going to be geared towards architectural designs and the assumption of moving forward into the construction phase with a construction manager. Obviously, we spent about a little over $10,000, maybe up to $15,000 so far on the architect. So one of the things you'll see in the budget amendment is to move those unspent funds from FY22 that were intended for both architectural design, construction management, and getting the project started, move those unused funds into FY23. And then in addition to that, we have $1 million from the ARPA money that is earmarked for that project. So once we get construction bids, we'll know what percentage of that is going towards construction. And then similar to what David mentioned before, there will be, soft costs, moving costs, relocation. Potentially the lease space that the city is exploring may be able to again, be a very helpful avenue for any of those staff impacted by the construction of the community center lower level.
Great, thank you. Councilwoman Costick.
Thank you. You answered most of my questions already, so thank you. My question was more about the timing, because you pointed out all of the ways that it'll be helpful to have these two be going on at the same time. Given the delay, I don't think it's really a delay necessarily, but your timeline to try to get the RFPs out in January, do you still think there's plenty of time, based on the timeline of the library, to make sure they are still working together and there's still that collaborative concept?
Yeah, and I think one of the things we'll be relying on is our Cadis, our construction management partner, to have a totally good sense of what's happening with the library project now that we've got a contractor awarded, and they'll be scouring through the construction schedule and really get a fine-tooth look at that. And then they can advise us on the most, the best time to start this, or if there's a particular time where you really want to wait till this phase of the project is done before you even think about moving forward with our construction of the community center. So we'll be relying on them to help us set out that timing. We're in a good situation in that we're in the driver's seat on the timing. We can speed up or slow down depending on the advice and the guidance we get from those in the field that have done this a lot more often than we have. And if they say, you know what, March is really a better time than January, we have the ability to do that. Or if they say you really need to get this thing moving, we have the ability to do that too. At this point, we've got ourselves built in some comfortable time through the end of this year to get all our details in a row before we go out to bid.
And then my other question, I guess, with regard to timing is, if I remember right, we're using some of our ARPA funds for this project. So if we do end up kind of doing some of that delaying, I just want to make sure that we're conscious of making sure we're using the ARPA funds within the timeline we have to use those.
Well, remind me, but I think we have till 2026 to have the funds
dedicated,
locked up, and I'm not sure if it's 2024 for. Yeah. So no problem to meet those requirements.
Thank you.
I'm just noting that it is a little past 10 o'clock. We have two other items here, so I'm going to try and speed us up a bit. Councilwoman Devala.
Well, and luckily, one of my questions was already asked, so. And I did just want to point out, and that was about timing and scheduling. And I did want to point out that I had submitted some written questions. You addressed them already, thank you. But to just point out to everybody that I had asked in particular about sustainable materials and quality of sustainability and environmental adaptability of materials, and that's built into the product specs, if I am reading your answer correctly.
Yep, correct. One of the things that the community center renovation does not include is any HVAC systems. We're using the existing systems within the building. You may also recall
Plus those wonderful new solar panels for the library.
Yeah, yep. Hopefully we'll be able to afford the expansion of those across all the usable roof surface. One of the things that we brought in when we brought in Bignell Hasser, our architectural firm. You may recall that early on, several years ago, they developed guidance for us on terms of finishes and products for use in the community center with the green initiative, reusability, high recycling content, LEED certified type materials. And so they're using that same catalog guideline in evaluating this building. There are some unique aspects of the building in that those portions that are related to police in terms of bulletproof glass and things like that. But to the degree that we have flexibility, we will always be selecting the higher quality green product with a better environmental footprint.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
Councilwoman Searcy.
Great. Thank you so much, especially for hanging in after 10. One question I have is about the fact that this is a time and materials contract, which makes sense. It allows for more flexibility, but I also wonder about whether or not that then subjects us to supply chain issues in terms of when we may actually move forward on procuring certain things. Do you think that the materials, and this kind of piggybacks off of what you said before, that because of the nature of this project, we may not run into certain supply chain issues because it's...
Yeah, we haven't got down to the specifics there. The time and materials contract we have is with the construction management firm.
Okay.
So it's not with the construction itself or the product, materials and products that we'll be purchasing for that construction itself. That will be hopefully a lump sum contract
okay.
similar to, for the construction piece. The time and materials is specific for the specialized service that we're getting through the construction management firm. And I just realized I failed to mention that we have a representative from Arcadis with us on the call. Sam Amara has been working with us and provided that proposal. And should we have any specific questions to Arcadis, he's on the line as well.
Okay, great. And so I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So for Arcadis with the services and the coordination piece, makes perfect sense for there to be flexibility. But when we're actually ready to bring on the contractor, then it will be ideally, fingers crossed, lump sum with the set time frame for completion.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
we'll be building that into the RFP.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I turned off my mic. Great, seeing no other questions on this item, it will be brought back to us for a vote next week. And then the next item, I believe Ms. Braithwaite's going to stay here.
I am, and there is Neil, and Neil, feel free to come sit up in front with me. Want to introduce Neil Weinstein, who is with the Low Impact Development Center. And I've had the pleasure of talking to Neil and Emily Cliff and a couple other folks that work with their organization over the past several months. And so happy to be bringing this forward to you this evening. Let me just get my notes in front of me and a minute to shift gears. So as you all well know, in the FY22 budget, after much discussion and great deal of community concern, the council advocated and provided $150,000 in the budget to go towards an evaluation of stormwater, particularly impacts on private property, with an eye towards resiliency, towards education, and towards try to figure out how the city could best position itself to address stormwater issues, particularly on private property. Up till this time, our stormwater programs have been entirely focused on public impacts. The stormwater system is located within public space to the degree possible. It manages stormwater in public space. There obviously is services provided to private property, but the focus of the system has been the public right-of-way and the public need for providing the infrastructure. So in addition to having to continue that, because we have a very extensive system, we have state requirements we need to meet for water quality, as well as we need to make sure the system we have is kept up, maintained, expanded, and then as issues come up, we need to be able to build out and provide additional stormwater management that not only helps reduce flooding risk, but also addresses water quality issues, which are very important. You don't just want to put the stormwater in a big pipe and shoot it into the creek. You want to slow it down, you want to cool it off, you want to drop out the sediment, and you want to not impact the receiving body of water negatively. But at any rate, that amount of money was provided by the council, and due to a huge number of factors, my department was not able to move forward very efficiently or effectively in that, and we really spent a lot of time internally with city manager and the deputy city manager, as well as city engineer and our staff, just trying to figure out how best to create a scope of work, how best to get this started. Obviously, it's not a one and done. It's just the beginning entree into how the city can start thinking about this and planning for this in the future. And so we spent quite a bit of time talking to our engineering partners. As you know, we have 2 engineering companies that are on on call for us that do a lot of our engineering design work, primarily related to sidewalks, traffic calming, but also on occasion stormwater. And in those meetings and in those discussions, we were getting a very engineered, focused response. And we knew that that wasn't really going to provide what we thought the council and the community was looking for. Then I started reaching out to other municipalities to try to inquire as to, do you guys have a program for stormwater or private property? And we started finding those programs around the country. A lot of them were related to rebate type programs or cost share type programs. A lot of them dealt specifically with very severe flood related issues, so they would help people pay for flood walls and things in neighborhoods and areas that were severely impacted by extreme flooding events. But through those conversations with other municipalities, I kept hearing about Neil and the Low Impact Development Center, and so finally reached out to them and was very pleased with learning about some of the work that they've done for our sister jurisdictions, and Neil can speak to that, but Somerset, Cheverly, Hyattsville, the county, Prince George's County in general. And in fact, the proposal that they've provided to us is using cost rates based on the contract that LID has with Prince George's County. So Neil and Emily and others at LID provided us a proposal that we have attached to the cover sheet. And it really envisions sort of three main tasks, one of which is broken into subsets. Again, happy to go through in detail. That information is provided there. If people have questions, I can go through it. I just am being sensitive to time. And so the proposal is before you. We are very excited about moving this forward. We feel like the partnership that we can develop with the Low Impact Development Center will help, like I say, get us started in the process. It won't be the be-all, end-all. It'll just help to inform us. It'll help to engage the community. And we really sort of see some of the deliverables as stepping stones to our next 5, 10, 20-year plan. It'll help us identify those areas in the city where there is significant flood or stormwater issues affecting private property, and how we can best prioritize responses to those and get that work kind of initially designed and developed. Some of the other interesting things that I think their proposal added, which I think will be real value to the city, is to provide sort of a catalog of stormwater management projects that people can do both on private property and on public space, and make that information available in a usable format that we can then have available through our website. So to help enhance and develop some of that, and we've heard that over and over from people in the community. They really want the city to play more of a role in helping to educate and kind of demystify and a little reality check on some of the things that people can, measures that they can take. And then in addition is a proposal for a dashboard that will live on the city's website, which will let people look at their individuals' properties, determine the amount of impervious and impervious surface. And we kind of have that now with our stormwater program. You can see what we say you have in terms of impervious surface. But what this will further enhance is your ability to say, in a 2-year storm, what runoff is from your property. In a 10-year storm, how much runoff is from your property. And then more importantly, be able to identify any of the potential grant or funding sources that people may be able to explore to help reduce the cost or cover some of the costs of the program. So those are some of the pieces of the tasks and the proposal that LID is proposing for us. The other point that I've heard raised is, kind of community interaction, public engagement, what's proposed for that. And again, that proposal has identified 4 virtual meetings and 1 on-site field meeting for the specific purpose of engaging and communicating and getting information from residents in the front end, and then explaining the process and going through the deliverables on the back end. So we do anticipate active engagement with members of the community, some we know and some we don't know, that are very interested in this topic, and so we look forward to having that as part of this process.
Great, thank you. Yeah, kick us off with a quick question just on that last point, Director Braithwaite. Maybe if the folks from the Low Impact Design Center can talk to us a little bit about, I know you've been working on other projects in other municipalities and other areas. If you've done, how you've done like community engagement, brought in, we have, as you may imagine, a very active group of residents, I think some of which you all are familiar with, who are very interested in working with the city on these issues. And so if you could just speak to that.
Sure, thanks. I'm a little soft-spoken, so.
Okay. I can hear you. Good.
Good. I just wanted to check. And I had a knee replacement, so I wobble
Oh,
around a
okay.
little bit. A couple of months. But, no, I think this should be good. Thanks. So, first of all, that's Emily up there who does a lot of our outreach, and she's at home with her kids. I think we can say that every community probably has its own unique outreach, what works and what doesn't work. Anywhere from flyers on doorknobs to websites to radio, whatever it is. And so we would probably work with Daryl and identify what's the best way to get the word out. And so we've worked in probably around the Anacostia, 7 or 8 communities, and we've probably had 8 or different approaches to outreach for it. Would you, Emily, can you nod your head there? So, or speak up. So we're pretty flexible, and we've done all kinds of things. And of course, now with everything being online, and it creates additional challenges. But so I hope that it can answer your question. So we have to look to you because we're very flexible about it. And we've done anything from charrettes to just small meetings to going out in the field.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember Smith?
Thank you so much. I want to first say I support this contract. I think this is exciting. Couple questions, Ms. Braithwaite. How are you going to determine the 20 locations? And I hope some of those include multifamily properties. Stormwater management is going to be, stormwater issues is going to be a big problem going into the future. I think it is our responsibility as a municipality to help residents in some ways, providing dollars to build some of this infrastructure on private property. I would ask that this dashboard, and I think a GIS dashboard is a great idea, that you could provide at these locations the before and after if we build something that says, you know, before this is the amount of stormwater that was on this property. After we make some improvements, this is what the stormwater is at this level, you know, showing the mitigation if there is any. And I guess the last thing I'll ask is, you worked in these 3 local jurisdictions. What were the things that you were able to build or recommend that needed to be built on private property? And in all of these jurisdictions, did the municipalities add money to help the landlord or pay for it 100%? And do these municipalities have a stormwater fee? How did it just come out of their general fund? How did they fund these projects?
So the answer is kind of yes.
I like that answer.
So let's start first with before and after. So what we're going to do is, you know, most of the watershed studies that you see, you know, and engineers have been typically trained. There's a bottom point here, and then there's a top point here, and they work backwards because the amount of flooding and the water backs up. We're taking a little different approach, is that we're starting from the top. So how does one house connect to another house, connect to an apartment building, right? And so we can identify, by doing it at the parcel level, what kind of mitigation we can use. And so in our proposal, we have, I believe, 2 areas. We're going to use a very detailed model called SWIM.
Oh, okay.
which is, I don't want to get into it because it'll give us all a headache by the end of the day. But it's
Councilwoman Devala obviously knows what it is, so.
She could brief us.
Yeah.
Yes, so, but if we have good data, we can give you a good answer. And you have good data here, which is really good, a good GIS system. So we can start and pick, we want to try and find something that's representative, right? So if you're interested in around multifamily housing, and I know you've identified 20-some, but you know, if we find something else during our adventure here, it could be 22 places that we look, or 23. So what that hopefully answers the first part, is that we will be looking at intervention. So we did the same thing in Mount Rainier, which is very similar in topography to here, and you know, when you look at it, same type of single family and multifamily, is we actually played another scenario and said, what happens if the storm drain pipes don't get cleaned all the time and they're half filled? Because you can design a system, but if it's half filled with sediment and dirt, it's not going to do very much. And so we did this different scenario to tell where the nick points were and where the critical areas that needed focused attention to. So that could answer your first one, hopefully. The second one on private property is, I don't mean to be too controversial about this, but everybody's got to do their part. And we worked with Somerset, and Somerset had a great survey about how much, and one of the questions was, how much do you spend in stormwater and landscaping around your house and to correct drainage problems? And it was very telling, because a lot of it was, a lot of money was spent. And you know, just going around to even different places like Chevrolet, where we did a project called Water Woes, right? And people were just trying to figure out if it was worth the investment to do that. So spending money on private lands, we actually did that in Chevrolet, because part of the reason it was flooding was because of the impact of the public infrastructure on it. So you have funding, and there are some challenges with doing public dollars on private property, right? But it can be done through grants. It can be done through different mechanisms. And what I'm trying to say is that it's going to be a hybrid approach. You know, there's going to have to be certain areas with public dollars. There's be certain that is done privately, and there's certain things that could be done jointly.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Great.
Councilmember Kovar and then Devala.
Thank you for joining us, and thanks to Ms. Braithwaite for the information as well. So just to continue on the 20 or 22 or however many of the hotspots there are, I think that's a really important part of this, and something that I was hoping we would be able to do with this grant. And just to follow along with what Councilmember Smith said, I really think it is important to try to have a lot of different areas in the city, types of housing and other structures, and maybe even some open areas that aren't necessarily, don't necessarily have buildings on them if they're affected by this.
Right.
And to me, you know, the key would be, what are either the biggest spaces or the most severe areas, or the ones that affect the most people. And so there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. But I think we need to make sure a broad look is taken at the whole geography of the city in designating these spots. And then I also think, and we've struggled at times with this, and I think we've gotten better at it in terms of the outreach, to find ways to have languages other than English. And this could be an early test of the, we've established a navigators program through ARPA that was partly aimed at that. I'm not sure we've really thought through exactly how we're going to use it, but this might be an example of how we could use it to assist with the work that you're doing. The only other, or the other primary area that I just had a little bit of concern about, it sounds like there's a good number of public meetings of various types that are planned, and you mentioned you would obviously meet with other people as necessary. I wonder personally whether we could find a way to make it a little more collaborative on a sustained basis, because we really have a lot of people here in the city who have been studying and working on this.
Right.
I think you even know some of them and have
Yeah.
been working with them. And what I would prefer not to have happen is just that, you know, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but we check off the boxes on 4 meetings. They're useful. People provide information. Maybe we even create a site where people can send in information. But I think this is one where we can really tap into, maybe tap is the right word to use when we're talking about water, but tap into the expertise that we have in the city in some more sustained way. So I don't know if that needs to be written explicitly into the proposal or what, but I appreciate your thoughts on that.
Yes, you do have some very involved people and very knowledgeable people about stormwater in this community. That'll be a great asset too. But, and maybe Emily, you could step in a little bit, talk about some of the ways that we did outreach at, you know, in Ward 1 and 2 in Hyattsville, where we did, I think we did do things in Spanish also for the community, as far as outreach materials. So we've done that. And I put down 4 meetings, but we're at a not to exceed contract time and materials. So if it turns out that someone says, well, it would be great to go to 8 wards and make 1 presentation in each ward or 1 workshop, we're certainly open to doing that to get more
But in
involved.
terms of being able to work more with the experts in the community on an ongoing basis, is that something that you envision being possible?
Sure, well, I'll put them to work.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
No, I've read some things that people have written here, and emails or through Friends of Sligo Creek. I live in the back of Sligo,
Right.
and there's a lot of really good viewpoints
Okay.
here.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Duvall.
Yes, thank you. I'm really excited about this, and I have heard good things about LIDC, and I think this is a great choice for what the council had in mind. I'm glad you're flexible on the outreach. I would like to just suggest that in developing the climate framework and efforts that we worked on, we tried to incorporate experts, but it is tricky to incorporate local experts who also then have, like any resident, a point of view. It sounds like you've had some experience with that, and that's great. So I'm more concerned about outreach to the different types of communities in Tacoma Park. Let's see if I can talk a little louder here, or a little closer to the mic, maybe. And both council members on either side of me mentioned what amounts to equity concerns in my view, and I'd like to hope that we could keep that in mind in selecting the 20 locations, and particularly the couple that we focus on, to make sure that we, for example, address multifamily concerns as well as
Yes.
single-family concerns, to make sure that we address the concerns of residents who may have single-family homes, but not the kind of money that they can put down for, you know, a lot of very high, very expensive stormwater work on their property.
Right.
So they fill out the survey and they didn't write a number in because they don't have the money to put into it. So just thinking about that, the more practical aspects of it. But I did have a question, and another overall comment. So that balance that you talked about between the public right-of-way work and the private property efforts is obviously of concern to everybody here. In the place that I think that we need advice, especially in your task 2? Yeah, the state guidelines and the county guidelines and all of that stuff, is how, is you referred to earlier, how does the city address public work on private property. And it sounds, again, like you have some experience in that.
Mhm.
So that's something I'd really like to see
Yeah.
come out of it. And my question, before I let you talk, sorry, is what did we see as the time frame for this study and the various tasks, or do we not know yet? Are we talking about a year and a half?
No.
4 meetings this fall? I don't think so, but just what are we thinking about?
It's within a year.
Okay, so within a year from when we
Yeah,
start?
notice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was my only actual question.
Yeah.
Great.
I think
Uh,
that sounds about right. I'm looking up at Emily, just so I can get a head nod.
Emily's nodding. Terrific. I'm not seeing any other questions, and I know it's getting late. And so we very much appreciate both of you taking the time, waiting until so late in the evening. We had, as you could tell, we had a lot to discuss tonight on our agenda. And I'll just close by saying thank you to both of you. We look forward to working with you in the city, and to Director Braithwaite, thank you so much. I know this has been a project long waiting, and you've been working really hard on it, and we know this is just the beginning. We're not going to solve our stormwater issues overnight, but this sounds like an excellent beginning down that path. So very glad to look forward to partnering with you in the city in the future.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And this will come back to us as a voting item next week as well. And the last item we have are appointments to boards and committees. And I don't know, who am I turning this over to? Councilwoman DeBala? Okay.
Everybody's waving at somebody else. I believe our procedure is normally for the Mayor Pro Tem to introduce individual appointment candidates. But I just wanted to say a couple of things to set it up, which is that we have had a subgroup of 3 council members looking at the applications. We did get 40 applications. So this semi-annual recruitment does seem to be working. We didn't have 40 spots. So 17 new applicants and 23 for reappointment. Almost everybody who was eligible for reappointment applied. One person is going to college and somebody else moved, but basically people seem to be willing to step back up, which is great. We can talk next week about stipends and some of the loose ends of some of the committees, but I wanted to just set the stage there. There are a couple of new appointments that are not yet resolved, so next week the list might have a couple extra names on it. And we are seeking to fill the very few remaining seats on COLTA Nuclear Free Committee. Well, that's not a few seats. There are a few seats available on COLTA, quite a few on Nuclear Free Committee still, and one on Sustainable Maryland. And so we'll be asking those folks who were not able to get their first or second choice if they are interested in one of those. So we're very close, but we're not completely done. And I'll turn it over to Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Ms. DeBala, and thank you for your work on getting these volunteers selected for the various committees. There are a lot of committees here, and I know this was took some time for you all to do this. I think, first of all, check with the city clerk. I'm sure this is posted on the website, or going to be posted on the website under tonight's meeting. So anyone curious to see where their name fits on which committee can visit the website tomorrow. There were, as Councilmember DeBala said, 40 applications that were received, and most of those have been put into the various committees. There are, as she said, several committees that there are still openings that need to be filled. I believe Councilmember DeBala said COLTA, the Nuclear Free Commission, and Sustainable Maryland. And so anyone interested in those openings, please contact the city clerk. And there are a couple of names, I guess, still to be considered for some of the vacant seats. But for the most part, you'll find the current status of this work on the website tomorrow under tonight's meeting. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman DeBala, Councilwoman Searcy and Costick for your work on this, the city clerk, and thank you, Councilmember Siemens. With that, we are done with our meeting this evening. I just want to say thank you again to our city staff. There's a lot of work that went into preparing for this meeting this evening. Excellent presentations, wonderful work by our city staff, and looking forward to voting on each of these items next week. So thank you very much, and we're adjourned.